6 terrifying encounters with the unknown awaited exploration, from family homes invaded to classrooms disrupted by mysterious forces. The East Texas pine woods cut a dark silence on December 29, 1980. A narrow country road stretched through winter's stillness. Betty Cash's Oldsmobile rolled homeward, carrying her friend Vicky Landrum, and Vicky's young grandson Colby, after a dinner out. The car's heater hummed softly, and the radio played quietly. Suddenly, everything changed. A strange glow appeared ahead through the trees. At first, Betty thought it might be an aircraft or helicopter searchlight, but this light behaved differently, pulsing steadily, growing brighter with each road bend. Vicky leaned forward, squinting. Colby shifted in the back seat. The glow transformed from distant light to overwhelming presence. It filled the windshield with blinding white intensity. Hovering directly above the road was a massive diamond-shaped craft. Flames licked from its underside, washing the pavement in fiery orange. The vehicle seemed to struggle against gravity, bobbing slightly, but holding position firmly across their path. Heat radiated in thick waves. The car's metal roof pinged and creaked. Betty froze, hands trembling on the steering wheel. They sat stunned, staring at this impossible machine burning against the night sky. Colby's scream broke the silence. Vicky held him tightly, whispering prayers. Her face glowed pale in the firelight. She later described the craft as almost biblical, something from Revelation itself. "That's Jesus," she told Colby, her own voice shaking. "He won't hurt us." Betty remained transfixed. This was no aircraft she recognized. No helicopter or plane hovered like this, expelling flames and heat without a sound of rotors or engines. Silent except for crackling flames, a diamond of our light suspended in cold darkness. She stepped outside. The heat struck immediately, searing her skin. The road vibrated beneath her shoes as Betty walked forward, drawn by a mix of awe and disbelief. The air was thick with burning metal and asphalt, making her eyes water. Her face felt like it was pressed against an open oven, but she kept moving. Shading her eyes, she stared upward, breath-catching. Towering above her was a massive alien craft with diamond-sided surfaces gleaming in the firelight. Behind her, Vicky shouted in panic, her voice sharp. Colby wailed. Betty remained transfixed, every nerve screaming that what she witnessed was real, something not made by human hands. Suddenly, the craft shifted. It tilted, wavered, and began to rise, flames belching harder from its underside. The heat grew unbearable. Betty stumbled back toward the car, her skin-burning lungs raw from the stench. Collapsing against the driver's side door, she gasped. Then came the sound. A deep, rhythmic thump, faint at first, then louder. Vicky's eyes darted upward. Over the trees, a swarm of helicopters appeared, dozens of them, rotors chopping the night air, red and white lights blinking. They surrounded the diamond-shaped craft in a loose formation, circling like vultures. The glow from the helicopters mixed with the fire below, casting monstrous shadows over the road. Betty, her face flushed red and hands trembling, climbed back into the car. "It's burning me," she whispered, her skin hot to the touch, hair damp with sweat. Vicky held Colby close, the boy's eyes wide with terror. Outside, the helicopters moved with deliberate intent, escorting the craft as it climbed higher. The diamond shape tilted again, steadied, and began to drift slowly northward, its swarm of escorts following tight around it. The flames dimmed slightly as it pulled away, though heat still shimmered in the air long after it passed. Silence returned for a moment. The three sat stunned, the engine ticking the only sound. Betty's skin glowed red, as though sunburned, her eyes watering uncontrollably. Vicky complained of dizziness. Colby, though uninjured, whimpered and clutched his grandmother's arm. Betty started the car, hands trembling, and pressed the accelerator. They drove the rest of the way in silence, the image of the flaming diamond seared into their minds. By the time they reached home, Betty was shivering, her stomach turning violently. By morning, the symptoms were undeniable. Betty Cash lay curled on her bed, her skin an angry red, her eyes swollen nearly shut, hair damp against her face, each breath rattled in her chest. Any attempt to sit up triggered waves of nausea that forced her back down. Her memory drifted to the burning heat that had rolled from the diamond-shaped craft, how it had seared her skin like sunlight intensified through glass. now that fire seemed alive inside her. Vicky Landrum wasn't faring much better. Though she had remained in the car, a mysterious glow had burned her arms and face. Blisters swelled where her skin was exposed, and she complained of dizziness and weakness, as if something had completely drained her energy. Little Colby cried softly beside her, his injuries lighter but still significant. Reddened cheeks and an inexplicable headache plagued the child. For him, the terror had been just as damaging as the physical heat. Within hours, Betty's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her eyes swelled until vision became nearly impossible. Her scalp burned and itched strangely, with hair beginning to fall out in clumps. Vomiting became relentless. Alarmed, her friends rushed her to a Houston hospital. The doctors were completely baffled. Her symptoms mimicked radiation poisoning, burns, nausea, hair loss, overwhelming weakness. Yet no conventional explanation made sense. She hadn't been near radiation equipment, industrial accidents, or medical procedures that could account for her condition. When Betty described the craft, the fire, the helicopters, the physicians exchanged uneasy glances. Some shook their heads, others meticulously took notes. In the days that followed, her burns worsened. Angry lesions spread across her skin. Her appetite disappeared, and weight fell away rapidly. Vicky and Colby, though less severely affected, also struggled. Nausea, headaches, and rashes persisted. Doctors prescribed various treatments, but nothing seemed to penetrate the deeper sickness. It was as if something had entered their bodies that night and stubbornly refused to leave. Words spread quickly. Friends whispered, neighbors asked questions. The encounter on that lonely December road was far from over. It was only the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. The truth emerged slowly, fraught with pain and uncertainty. Betty's health was deteriorating rapidly, her body a testament to an inexplicable encounter. Vicky watched her friends suffer, both women haunted by what they had witnessed that night. Initially, they were reluctant to speak, fearing ridicule. But as Betty's condition worsened, silence became impossible. They decided to report their experience to authorities, not UFO groups or media, but to official channels. Local police listened politely. Their interest peaked when the women described dozens of helicopters accompanying the strange craft. Military bases in Texas raised questions. Could these helicopters belong to the Army or Air Force? And if so, what were they escorting? Questions multiplied. Why had this event burned them? Why the official silence? Why were they left to suffer without explanation? Betty was hospitalized repeatedly. Her skin blistered horrifically, patches of hair falling out, her scalp raw and exposed. Vicky grew pale and exhausted caring for Colby. Every attempt to find answers met resistance. Base officials denied any knowledge. Helicopter squadrons claimed no involvement in flights over East Texas. Yet the women remained certain of what they'd seen. Rotors filling the sky, blinking lights from 24 aircraft circling a diamond-shaped craft. Vicky had counted at least 20 helicopters. Betty insisted there were more. These were not hallucinations. Determined, they reached out to Congress and local representatives. Whispers began in newsrooms, small articles raising eyebrows without providing answers. UFO researchers soon learned of their case. They photographed Betty's burns, listened to witnesses, with no apparent motivation to fabricate their story. Betty's condition became terrifying. Sores covered her body. Fingernails cracked and fell away. Her strength ebbed. Doctors tested extensively: autoimmune disorders, chemical exposure, rare diseases. Nothing matched radiation signature, yet without proof of exposure, treatment remained limited. At night, Betty lay awake, her skin burning, fever consuming her. In her mind, the diamond craft returned, its belly aflame, light flooding the road. Helicopters surrounded it, blades thundering, lights blinking in eerie coordination. Whatever that thing was, it had not been alone. And that realization was the most chilling truth of all. Not. By early 1981, the landscape of their lives had been irrevocably altered. Betty Cash was a shell of her former self, once strong and independent, now dependent on others for the simplest tasks. Her body told a story of inexplicable trauma: thinning hair, brittle nails, dramatic weight loss, and persistent, unevenly healing lesions. Vicky Landrum and her grandson Colby bore their own marks from that. Winter night, while Vicky's physical symptoms were less severe, Her face showed visible aging, burns that never completely healed. Colby, though physically less affected, carried deep emotional wounds plagued by nightmares of fire and hovering lights. Often waking in terror and clinging to his grandmother, their silence could no longer hold. They began speaking openly about the encounter, not seeking fame, but desperate for understanding. Something inexplicable had happened on that lonely road, a craft accompanied by U.S. military helicopters that defied explanation. Vicky clung to her faith, believing the experience was a warning, something they were never meant to see. She watched Colby, who had become unnaturally quiet, often finding him staring out windows with wide eyes, as if anticipating something's return. The isolation was profound. Doctors couldn't explain their conditions. The government remained silent. Neighbors whispered. The evidence was etched into their skin, their health, their very lives. Betty repeated a haunting refrain. We saw it. It burned us, and no one will admit what it was. The silence from authorities only deepened their unease. If helicopters had truly been present that night, someone must have ordered them. Someone must have seen the craft. Someone knew, but they weren't talking. The most terrifying aspect wasn't what came from the sky, but the silence that followed on the ground. Months after the encounter, the burns remained. Betty's vibrant energy was gone, replaced by pain and fragility. Her body bore witness to an encounter that defied explanation, a mystery that grew darker with each passing day. The story of a mysterious encounter began with Betty, Vicky, and Colby, 3 witnesses to an unexplained event that would consume years of their lives. They filed a lawsuit against the United States government. Their claim, straightforward: if this was an American experimental vehicle or secret weapon, then the government was responsible for the harm caused. News outlets quickly picked up their case. Researchers descended, documenting Betty's burns in stark photographs, hospital gowns, blistered skin, a drawn face that spoke volumes. Vicky quietly described a light that transformed into something terrifying, while Colby recalled helicopters swarming the night sky, but the government denied everything. No helicopters, no operations, no experimental craft. Official records showed nothing. The lawsuit crawled through years of legal motions, with government lawyers arguing for dismissal. Even sympathetic observers acknowledged the slim chances of success without concrete proof. Betty's body was the only testimony, her declining health, her scars a silent narrative of that night. In 1986, the court ruled against them, dismissing the case for lack of evidence. Betty wept. Vicky sat silently, hands trembling. Colby stared at the floor, their pursuit of justice met with complete silence. Yet behind the scenes, researchers uncovered fragments of corroboration. Military sources, speaking off the record, admitted to helicopters in the area. Some hinted at experimental projects that could explain the strange craft, but no one would speak officially. Betty's health continued to deteriorate. Repeated hospitalizations weakened her immune system. In 1998, she died at 69, never recovering from that night on the country road. Vicky lived longer, carrying her own scars, still insisting to anyone who would listen that what they witnessed was real. Colby grew into adulthood, carrying the weight of an unexplained encounter that had defined their lives. Betty Cash, her nephew Colby, and her friend Vicky Landrum drove down a lonely road through the pine woods of East Texas on a cold winter night. What happened next would haunt them forever. A massive diamond-shaped craft hovered above the road, spewing fire and radiating intense heat that burned their skin, melted their car's dashboard, and left lasting physical scars. Unlike many UFO stories, this one came with undeniable evidence. Medical records documented their injuries. Multiple witnesses, including a child, saw the craft, and dozens of military helicopters mysteriously surrounded the area afterward. The incident defied simple explanation. Skeptics found the case particularly troubling. No natural phenomenon could create such a craft. No conventional aircraft could cause radiation-like burns. If it was a hoax, why would ordinary people endure years of medical suffering, ridicule, and legal battles? They gained nothing. They lost everything. In the quiet years that followed, the road remained unchanged. But those who knew the story felt an unease. Drivers claimed the air sometimes felt warmer, as if the heat of the craft still lingered. Hunters reported hearing distant helicopter sounds when the woods were otherwise silent. The memory became more than just a UFO sighting. There was a moment when the sky opened, when fire fell, and human lives were forever altered. Whether alien or human technology, the truth was clear. Something had hovered over that road. Something radiated heat that scarred flesh, melted surfaces, and burned eyes. Something moved with a swarm of helicopters in its shadow. Betty Cash never stopped telling her story. Even as her health failed, she would insist. We saw it, it burned us, and they will never admit it. Government files remain sealed. Official records stay silent. But the scars remain. In the dark Texas woods, when wind rattles branches and the road stretches empty under stars, it's not hard to imagine a glow returning. A diamond of fire suspended in the cold, waiting to remind us how helpless we truly are when the night chooses to reveal its secrets. On a bright day in the northern wilderness, Stefan Mikulak moved carefully through the rocky terrain. A hobbyist geologist with a patient nature, he had spent countless weekends exploring the forests around Falcon Lake. This particular morning started like any other, with Stefan packing his usual kit: a compass, hammer, notebook, tape measure, and a flask of tea his wife had insisted he bring. The forest was alive with bird calls echoing off the rocks. Stefan worked methodically, chipping at stones and jotting down observations as he ventured deeper into the untouched bush. Suddenly, everything changed. The birds went silent, their chatter abruptly cutting off. Stefan stopped mid-swing, listening intently to an unusual sound. A high-pitched noise caught his attention, like air escaping through a valve. Looking up, he saw something extraordinary. Two glowing oval-shaped objects hung in the sky above the trees. They moved with an unnatural, smooth precision that defied explanation. For a moment, Stefan wondered if they might be experimental aircraft, but their movements made no sense. One craft remained steady, glinting in the sunlight, while the other began a deliberate descent toward the clearing. The air felt thick with tension. A steady hum replaced the earlier high-pitched sound. As it drew closer, the craft revealed itself in stark detail. A disc approximately 35 feet across, with a surface like polished steel that seemed to glow softly at its edges. The craft settled on a rocky outcrop just 50 yards from Stefan, who stood rooted in disbelief. A second craft continued to hover overhead, as if keeping watch. Despite being a practical man not prone to flights of fancy, Stefan found himself completely unprepared for the scene before him. He approached slowly, each step crunching on pine needles and grit. At about 20 feet away, he stopped. The object was undeniably real, solid, massive, and utterly impossible. Its seamless surface curved with an alien precision, reflecting the surrounding landscape like liquid metal. Stefan wiped sweat from his palms, his heart racing as he confronted something beyond his wildest imagination. Stefan stood in the clearing, staring at an object that defied explanation. Its shape resembled a giant saucer, smooth and featureless, except for a hatch-like opening near the center. White light spilled through this opening, soft yet distinct. Muffled mechanical sounds drifted from inside, clicks, air hissing, and what seemed like voices. His rational mind struggled to make sense of it. Military test vehicle, he told himself. Nerves making his Polish accented English thick, he called out. Do you need help? Silence responded. Switching languages, he tried again. Polish, German, even a few Russian words. His words disappeared into the still air without echo. The hatchlight dimmed. Curiosity battling fear, Stefan edged closer. Through the glow, a maze of panels and strange instruments appeared, blinking with colored lights in incomprehensible patterns. A metallic, sulfuric smell stung his nose, making his eyes water. Suddenly, the hatch sealed with a dull thud, final like a vault closing. Heat waves rolled over him, air shimmering. From a grid-like panel, a blast of hot air erupted, striking his chest and searing through shirt and skin. Stefan collapsed, crying out. He frantically tore at his smoldering clothes, the pain sharp and immediate. Through tears and smoke, he watched the craft rise, soundlessly without dust or wind, as if gravity meant nothing. It tilted, hovered briefly, then shot skyward at impossible speed. A second craft followed, vanishing into the blue. Deafening silence returned. Birds stirred. Cautiously, their songs fractured and weak. Stefan trembled on the rock, clutching his burned chest. His vision swam. Ears rang. When he tried to rise, he could barely stand. Stefan staggered through the forest, his body a map of agony. Burns covered his torso in a grotesque red, square welts seared into his skin like a brutal branding. Every movement sent waves of pain rippling through him, each step a battle against his failing body. The morning's calm woods now felt like a hostile maze, shadows pressing in with menacing intent. Sulphur's bitter, metallic stench clung to him, making him gag. Sweat poured down his forehead as his chest burned, forcing him to pause and retch against a tree. Peeling off the remnants of his ruined shirt, Stefan exposed raw, blistered skin marked by an impossible pattern. Touching the wound sent sticky fluid across his fingertips and triggered fresh surges of nausea. He had been marked by something not of this earth, machines or a craft that didn't belong. The highway seemed impossibly far. What should have been an hour's trek now stretched into an endless ordeal. He collapsed repeatedly onto pine needles, dragging himself forward through sheer willpower. The forest remained unnaturally silent, with distant birds calling hesitantly, as if sensing the strange encounter that had just occurred. By mid-afternoon, Stefan reached the roadside, a ruin of sweat, dirt, and blood. His burns pulsed angrily in the open air. A passing motorist slowed, then stopped, alarmed by the wild-eyed man stumbling onto the gravel shoulder. Stefan waved weakly, calling out. He knew with sick certainty that this was no ending. It was only beginning. No, Stefan stumbled to the roadside, his broken English a desperate plea. Please help. When a driver rolled down his window, the first thing that hit him was the smell, sulphur, acrid and sharp, pouring off Stefan's body and clothing. The motorist recoiled, asking what had happened. Stefan could barely form words. Something about a machine had burned him. Trembling, he collapsed into the car seat, the strange chemical odor filling the interior. The driver, unsure but concerned, agreed to take him closer to town. At the motel, the manager took one look and immediately called a doctor. By evening, Stefan lay in a hospital bed, physicians examining his peculiar burns. Their expectations of standard injuries, a fire or machinery accident, quickly vanished. The grid pattern on his chest and stomach was too precise, too deliberate to be natural. His condition was far more alarming than the burns. Stefan vomited repeatedly, his stomach twisting violently. His skin grew pale and clammy, his pulse weak. Doctors suspected radiation exposure, though their tools couldn't definitively confirm it. His symptoms: nausea, weakness, skin burns aligned with high radiation levels. Word spread fast in Falcon Lake. A man hospitalized with impossible burns, claiming an encounter with an unearthly craft, drew immediate attention. Reporters arrived, locals whispered, and officials began asking questions. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were first on the scene. They interviewed Stefan, who remained calm despite his suffering. He described a disc, a hatch, voices, and a searing heat blast. The Mounties listened carefully, but remained skeptical, suggesting natural gas vents or hallucinations. Days later, investigators arrived at the clearing. What they found: the rock where Stefan claimed the craft landed bore a large, scorched circle. Nearby vegetation was singed and wilted, as if exposed to extreme heat. Instruments detected unusual radiation readings, localized and faint, but measurable. Soil and rock samples appeared, ordinary to the naked eye, but later laboratory tests would reveal traces of something extraordinary. Not Stefan's health deteriorated rapidly after the incident. His once strong physique crumbled, weight loss, thinning hair, constant fatigue. Doctors struggled to diagnose his condition, finding no standard explanation for his mysterious symptoms. The burns on his torso told a different story. The grid-like imprint remained, a stark reminder of something unusual. Background radiation levels at the site were elevated, though not immediately lethal. Something strange had definitely occurred. Journalists latched onto the story. A man burned by a UFO at Falcon Lake. But Stefan himself shunned publicity. He was a private man who simply wanted to recover his health. When asked, he would recount the events with quiet, consistent insistence. I saw what I saw. It burned me, that is all. Government agencies took notice. The Canadian Department of National Defense and the United States Air Force, through Project Blue Book, began investigating. They exchanged files, interviewed Stefan, and conducted site visits. The physical evidence intrigued them: real burns, genuine radiation sickness symptoms, actual site contamination. Without the craft itself or conclusive photographic proof, The case remains suspended between belief and skepticism. For Stefan, these debates meant little. His nights were haunted by vivid memories. The blast of heat, the gleaming disc, the sulfuric smell. Sometimes he felt watched, though no figures appeared. As weeks passed, it became clear this wasn't just a physical encounter. Whatever visited Falcon Lake had left deeper marks than visible wounds. The mystery grew with emerging evidence that even hardened skeptics found difficult to dismiss. On in the months after the incident, Falcon Lake transformed. Once an ordinary spot on the map, it became a place whispered about across Canada, forever tied to something unexplainable. For Stefan Mekak, though, there was no sense of mystery. His world had narrowed to pure survival. The day that burned him wasn't letting go. His health never truly recovered. Waves of nausea would come and go unpredictably, sometimes so intense he could barely eat. His skin, though healed from the worst burns, carried a permanent mark of the grid, a faint but unmistakable pattern that would flare red without warning, as if the burn remained alive beneath his flesh. Doctors tested and speculated, some suggesting chemical poisoning, others hinting at radiation exposure. None could explain why the pattern returned in cycles, glowing and fading like a persistent scar. Stefan retreated from public view. He had never sought attention, and now reporters hounded him. Skeptics mocked him in print, and strangers demanded the full story. His response remained consistent. "I saw what I saw. It burned me. I can't change that." Neighbors viewed him with a mix of pity and uncertainty. Some believed him, some did not. But everyone recognized he had gained nothing from telling his story. Instead, he had lost his health, his peace, and his privacy. Government investigations continued. The RCMP repeatedly returned to the site, measuring radiation that had diminished but still lingered in the soil and rocks. The Canadian Department of National Defence meticulously documented the incident, noting medical evidence, scorch marks, and contamination. The U.S. Air Force requested copies, and in Dayton, Ohio, the case became another unexplained entry in Project Blue Book. Samples from the landing site yielded strange results. Rocks were found with unnatural veins of melted silver, fused as if exposed to extreme heat, impossible from ordinary sources. Soil samples showed radioactivity concentrated precisely where Stefan claimed the craft had rested, with traces diminishing in irregular patterns. Skeptics proposed explanations: contamination from clothing, potential hoaxes, discarded industrial waste. Yet no industry existed near Falcon Lake, and no equipment in Stefan's possession could have generated such distinctive readings. For decades, Stefan's experience lingered in official records. Files accumulated, filled with assessments from officers, scientists, and officials. Some were cautiously skeptical, others quietly disturbed. An RCMP officer noted Stefan's sincerity and credibility, observing he was not prone to exaggeration. His story remained remarkably consistent across numerous retellings, always recounted in plain words. If this was a fabrication, it had brought him nothing but suffering. His health steadily declined. Weight loss, dizzy spells, and increasing weakness became his reality. His family watched with constant worry. His wife remained supportive, though the strain was evident. That fateful morning, Stefan had simply gone into the woods, hoping to find silver to help support his family. Instead, he returned with wounds that would never truly heal, and a narrative that cast his household under harsh suspicion. Years passed. The scar on his chest faded but never completely disappeared. Periodically, it would flare in angry redness, the grid squares seeming to retain a lingering heat. Doctors photographed the marks, puzzled and unsettled. Stefan submitted to test after test, but no cure or explanation emerged. The Falcon Lake clearing developed its own mythology. Hunters, hikers, and locals occasionally explored the site, curious about the stories. Some reported strange sensations, nausea, dizziness, headaches. Others claimed the scorched rock circle looked fundamentally different, as if touched by something beyond natural explanation. Throughout the subsequent decades, Stefan avoided seeking attention. He spoke when asked, cooperated with officials, but never attempted to profit from his experience. Even on his deathbed in the 1990s, he maintained a calm, consistent insistence. "I have told you the truth. That is all I can do." Eventually, the files became public. Researchers meticulously examined RCMP reports, defense memos, lab analyses, and Project Blue Book entries. The case stood out not for providing definitive answers, but for its stubborn evidentiary presence, burns, radiation-scarred rock, and medical records all connected to a man who simply wanted an ordinary life. Labeled Canada's most well-documented UFO case, this description might have been something Stefan himself would have rejected. A characterization colder and more sensational than his own humble account. Note, for some, the story isn't about UFOs, evidence, or historical records. It's about a single moment in the woods when something impossible landed, something that burned itself into a person's skin and life story. What lingers afterwards is more than physical. It's the silence, the ridicule, the unexplained scars that glow when they shouldn't. The memory of a wingless machine that rose and vanished into the sky, leaving no trace. Today, the Falcon Lake clearing remains just another unremarkable forest patch to passing strangers. But those who know the story understand the ground feels different. The rocks remember. The soil remembers. Stand there long enough, breathing the still air, and you might sense something else. The weight of an alien presence. The echo of a machine that branded a man with a mark no one could erase. The Hopkinsville siege unfolded on a thick, humid Kentucky summer night. The Sioux farmhouse sat alone at the forest's edge, the kind of night when air hangs motionless, insects sing endlessly, and darkness presses against window panes with unexpected weight. 11 people were gathered inside, family, friends, and children who had no idea their night would become legendary in American folklore. The story began just after dusk when Billy Ray Taylor, a visitor from Pennsylvania, went to fetch water from the well. The sky was darkening when something caught his eye. Above the treetops, a glowing disk drifted silently, brighter than a star, trailing rainbow fire. It moved low and deliberate before sinking into the woods behind the house. Billy Ray's heart raced as he rushed back inside. "Something just landed out there," he said, his voice shaking. Initially, everyone laughed. Billy Ray was known for tall tales, but as their laughter faded, his trembling hands and pale face spoke volumes. An unsettling stillness crept in, pressing against the walls. Minutes later, the family dog began barking wildly, straining at its chain near the back door. The barking turned frantic, then suddenly stopped, cut off as if smothered. Silence dropped over the farmhouse like a heavy blanket. Lanterns flickered, shadows stretched long against the walls, every face turned toward the windows, listening. At first, nothing. Then everything changed. The back door's glow revealed a chilling sight. A small figure stood barely 3 feet tall, its head grotesquely large compared to its thin body. Massive yellow eyes gleamed like lanterns, freezing everyone in place. Its body seemed metallic, catching every hint of light, moving in an unnatural way, gliding, jerking, feet barely touching the ground. Weapons were quickly grabbed. A shotgun, a rifle. The creature approached with hands raised, almost as if surrendering. Shots rang out, shattering the night's silence. The being flipped backward, tumbling into the grass and vanishing into shadows. A moment of relief was short-lived. Scratching sounds emerged. Glowing eyes now peered through the roof's overhang, staring directly into the window. Panic erupted. A shot splintered wood, and the figure fell, only to rise again and drift back into darkness. The siege had begun. Figures surrounded the house, pressing glowing eyes against windows. Long fingers clawed at screens. Shadows shifted just beyond the lantern light. Gunshots seemed ineffective. The creatures would float back unharmed, returning minutes later. Terror consumed the interior. Children cried while adults whispered desperate prayers between gunshots. They tried barricading doors, dragging furniture across entryways, but nothing stopped the intruders from circling. These beings displayed extraordinary patience. They never rushed, simply watching. Every outside sound became unbearable. A step in the grass, a scrape against siding, the creak of the roof as another landed. At times they appeared to float inches above ground, drifting closer, tilting oversized heads to study the trapped humans. Hours stretched endlessly, sweat beaded on foreheads. Lantern flames burned low. Guns trembled in exhausted hands. Each glimpse of those shining eyes felt like a living nightmare. The creatures remained silent, making only soft scratching and tapping sounds. By midnight, the farmhouse was no longer a home. It was a fortress under siege, surrounded by beings impervious to bullets. The family huddled together, their world transformed into a scene of unimaginable terror. Nerves stretched to breaking point. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Would they leave? Hours crawled by, each moment more unbearable than the last. Inside the house, the Sioux family and their guests sat frozen, barely daring to breathe. Every time they thought the creatures had retreated, new signs of their presence would emerge. Glowing eyes would appear at a window, or claws would scrape against the thin wooden walls. The men fired repeatedly, gun blasts thundering through the small rooms. Yet each time, the result remained the same. The beings would fall back into shadows, only to return moments later, completely unharmed. Their bullets might as well have been pebbles tossed into a river. Fear gradually transformed into exhaustion. Whispered conversations between adults trembled with uncertainty. Should they attempt to escape? Each time someone considered peeking outside, a creature would be waiting, half glimpsed in the lantern's dim light, never gone long enough to risk a dash to the cars. Children clung desperately to their mothers, beyond tears. One boy pressed his face into his mother's dress, trembling with each rattling gunshot. Smoke and sweat hung thick in the air, saturated with terror. At one point, Billy Ray approached the window, straining to see outside. Suddenly, a clawed hand reached toward him from the shadows, long fingers brushing the screen. He shouted, fired point blank, and the figure flipped backward with an unnatural, weightless motion that suggested it didn't belong to this world. Then silence. The family stood motionless, ears ringing. That's when the roof creaked again. Something heavy shifted above them. A deliberate scratching moved across the shingles. The lantern light caught two unblinking eyes peering over the roofline. Another shot, another fall, another return. The siege seemed endless. The beings never forced entry, never broke glass, or tore through doors. But their persistence was far more terrifying. They seemed to want to erode the family's courage, hour by hour. Their stares weren't hungry or animalistic, but calculated, studying, curious. As the clock approached 3 a.m., the family teetered on the edge of breaking. Ammunition dwindled with each desperate shot, hope growing thinner with each passing moment. The night was shattered by a desperate escape, with children trembling in their mothers' arms, even asleep. The family knew they couldn't endure another moment. They waited for a brief calm when the yard seemed empty, no glowing eyes piercing the darkness. In a sudden burst of courage, they gathered everyone and threw open the front door. The entire group sprinted across the yard toward the two cars parked in the drive. Darkness consumed them. Grass whipped at their ankles, each step feeling impossibly long. Suddenly, the silence broke. A rustle, a movement. Those haunting eyes reappeared among the trees. They piled into the cars, doors slamming, engines roaring, gravel scattered as the vehicles lurched forward, racing down the dirt road toward Hopkinsville. Only when the farmhouse vanished did they dare to breathe. Silence filled the car. Pale faces stared ahead. Children huddled in the back seats, wide-eyed, still listening for scratching at the windows. At the police station, they burst through the doors, wild-eyed and shaking. Initially, officers dismissed their story as a prank. The family raving about little men attacking their farmhouse seemed ridiculous, but the terror in their voices silenced any potential mockery. They were clearly traumatized, having survived something extraordinary. Within minutes, a caravan of police cars, state troopers and press followed the Suttons back to their farmhouse. Armed men fanned out, flashlights cutting through the yard, rifles raised. The house told a brutal story, riddled with bullet holes, sidings scarred by gunfire. Inside, empty shell casings littered the floor, but the mysterious figures had vanished. Officers searched meticulously. They found disturbed ground where something heavy had pressed down, yet no human-like footprints existed. They combed the woods, fields, and even the roof. Nothing. Just an oppressive silence interrupted by nervous men adjusting their rifles. The Suttons tried explaining, describing glowing eyes, floating movements, and inexplicable resistance to gunfire. Officers listened, their skeptical glances revealing deep doubts. Yet, even the most cynical admitted something had genuinely terrified this family, something powerful enough to drive 11 people, including children, into a desperate flight. The farmhouse stood silent after the police left, tension hanging thick in the air. Armed officers had come and gone, giving the family a brief moment of relief, but they knew deep down that this wasn't over. As lanterns flickered low, the eerie quiet became unbearable. No one dared to speak above a whisper, afraid that sound might somehow summon back the creatures. The scratching on the roof started again, soft, deliberate. Soft movements suggested something was crawling, shifting its weight. Suddenly a head peeked over the eaves. Enormous, unblinking eyes glowed down at them. Billy Ray shouted and fired through the screen. Glowing eyes blinked out, but in the silence, more movement could be heard in the grass. The farmhouse seemed surrounded. Dozens of beings drifted through the yard, circling and waiting. Some family members swore the creatures floated above ground, moving like they were swimming through air. Others described their skin as faintly metallic, gleaming in the lantern light, with piercing yellow-white eyes that seemed to see through walls. Throughout the night, no one slept. They could only watch the windows, grip their weapons, and hope dawn would bring an end to the nightmare. As grey light slowly bled across the horizon, the strange figures melted into the woods, vanishing as if they had never existed. The siege was over. The Kentucky fields lay quiet under the first touch of knew they would never forget this night. The farmhouse stood silent, its empty windows a stark reminder of the night before. Cicadas resumed their morning song, breaking the eerie quiet. The family sat drained, their relief palpable but inexplicable. Later that day, investigators and reporters arrived to find a house marked by an unimaginable battle. Bullet holes peppered the walls and window frames. Spent shells scattered across the floors. Witnesses recounted a terrifying story of glowing creatures seemingly immune to gunfire, hours trapped in pure terror. Skeptics dismissed the account. Some suggested misidentified wildlife, owls or monkeys mistaken for strange beings. Others pointed to hysteria, exaggeration, or alcohol-induced hallucinations. Yet the responding officers privately admitted something had genuinely frightened the Sutton family beyond rational explanation. This was no simple prank or mass panic. In the days that followed, the family struggled to return to normalcy. Children woke from nightmares, screaming about glowing eyes at the windows. Adults spoke in hushed tones about their experience, knowing most would not believe them. One detail haunted them all: the beings' behavior. They hadn't attacked or attempted to harm anyone. Instead, they watched. Their movements were patient, clinical, more like a scientific examination than an assault. It felt less like an invasion and more like a strange observation. The story spread quickly through newspapers, radio reports, and whispered conversations. They became known as the Hopkinsville goblins, little green men who marked a turning point in UFO folklore. The first time aliens were described as small, glowing figures. For the Sutton family, this was no legend. It was a living memory. Every nighttime creak, every roof scratch brought the terror rushing back. The beings never returned, but the questions remain. Why had they come? Were they accidental visitors from another world? Something older and stranger, hidden within the earth? Or had they deliberately chosen this isolated farmhouse to test the boundaries of human fear? No definitive proof ever emerged. No photographs, no bodies, no footprints to silence the doubters. Only scarred walls, terrified witnesses, and a night of horror that would be retold for generations. In the farmhouse's silence, long after the cicadas sang and the initial shock faded, the mystery endured. The night sky over Tehran hung still, heavy with late summer heat. Stars scattered across the desert horizon, city lights glimmering below. It was just before midnight on September 19, 1976, when the first calls started flooding in. Civilians across the city reported something strange. A bright light, unmoving, too large to be a star, too steady for a plane. The duty officer initially dismissed it, perhaps Venus or a helicopter distorted by the haze, but the calls kept coming, insistent and unnerved. At Morabad International Airport's control tower, something shifted. When the controller stepped outside, the sight was undeniable. A brilliant light suspended north of the city, pulsing faintly, shifting between white, red, and blue, far brighter than any star. This was no ordinary night. The Air Force was alerted. Shortly after 11 p.m., an F-4 Phantom fighter jet roared from Shoroy Air Base, cutting through the silence. In the cockpit, the pilot locked eyes on the strange light immediately, hanging above the city, far brighter than standard navigation lights. As he accelerated towards it, The encounter grew increasingly bizarre. The object remained motionless at first, then suddenly darted forward with impossible acceleration. The pilot pushed his throttle, climbing higher, straining his engines. The object responded with erratic bursts, upward, sideways, maneuvers no earthly aircraft could replicate. When the pilot attempted to lock onto his radar, something extraordinary happened. The scope showed nothing, yet the glowing light remained directly in front of him. Suddenly, his instruments died. Radar flickered out. Communication cut. Cockpit instruments froze in silence. Alarmed, he broke pursuit. As quickly as they failed, his instruments revived. Shaken, he returned to base with an unnerving report. "It's out there, and it's not ours." Another jet was dispatched. This time, 2 crewmen aboard the F-4. The wind rustled through the grass. The family swore they could still feel it, the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting just beyond the tree line. Pilots were prepared to engage as they closed in on an object that appeared as a brilliant shifting sphere of light. Suddenly it split. A smaller, intense orb detached from the larger glow and shot toward their aircraft at incredible speed. The co-pilot panicked. Their systems went completely dead. Missiles wouldn't launch. Communications failed. The cockpit became useless. Terrified, the pilot banked sharply, trying to evade the incoming orb. At the last moment, the smaller object glided smoothly beneath the jet and rejoined the larger sphere. Immediately after the pilot turned away, systems returned to normal. The glowing object remained steady, almost taunting them. Back at Marabad, air traffic controllers and radar operators witnessed something extraordinary. Binoculars and equipment confirmed intermittent returns, objects appearing and disappearing in unexplainable patterns. Witnesses on the ground reported a smaller orb descending into the desert outside Tehran, glowing as it landed. The F-4 continued to shadow the object from a distance, unwilling to risk another close encounter. Shaken and sweating, the crew's radio message was chilling. "This is not human technology." Throughout the night, reports flooded in from multiple sources. Soldiers, pilots, civilians from different neighborhoods all described the same impossible sight. Glowing spheres moved at speeds no jet could match, disabling electronics and toying with Iran's most advanced fighters. By dawn, the sky was empty. The objects had vanished as silently as they appeared. What remained was pure. Seasoned pilots had been rendered powerless, weapons were useless, radar was blind. Controllers had seen the impossible with their own eyes. Civilians across Tehran stared at a light that defied explanation. One truth settled over those present. Whatever crossed Tehran's skies that night came with purpose. It demonstrated power and revealed how helpless human technology could be. Questions lingered in every mind, whispered in every barracks, repeated in every home. Why Tehran? Why that night? And would it return? The night sky above Mehabad was alive with whispers. Soldiers and civilians alike spoke in hushed tones about strange lights darting across the darkness. At the Shiraki Air Base, pilots took these reports seriously. No one was laughing. 2 F-4 crews had encountered something beyond comprehension. Their second mission left them pale and deeply unsettled. Trained to confront enemy jets with confidence, they found themselves utterly powerless against a glowing sphere. Missiles went dead. Instruments fell silent. They were forced to turn back while the unknown object toyed with them. In the debriefing room, hardened men spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. Their voices dropped to near-silent levels. "I shut everything down," they said flatly, revealing more through their tone than their words. Mehabad's control tower backed up their accounts. Civilian phone lines buzzed with reports throughout the night. A family on the city's edge watched a smaller orb descend into the desert, hovering and glowing before vanishing. Others described light beams slicing downward like searchlights, yet without a sound. Investigators arrived swiftly. High-ranking officers listened carefully, their skepticism balanced by respect for trained witnesses. They requested every possible piece of evidence: radar logs, communication transcripts, medical reports. Initially, they wondered about hostile technology from Soviet or American experiments, but nothing matched. The data defied explanation. The speeds, sudden maneuvers, and ability to cut power from miles away exceeded technological capabilities of 1976 and still today. Pilots described an encounter that seemed almost deliberate. One spoke of being played with, the object approaching close enough to demonstrate his insignificance. Another recalled a terrifying moment when a sphere raced toward them, veering away at the last second as if intentionally causing fear. Ground engineers found no permanent damage to the jets. Instruments worked perfectly back at base, yet logs confirmed exactly what the pilots described. Critical systems had shut down in perfect synchronization, suggesting control from an external unknown source. The Iranian Air Force report was meticulous, its careful wording barely concealing the profound implications. What investigators discovered was far more unsettling than a simple aerial encounter. This was not a meteor, a flare, or a trick of light. It was intelligence. The object had done more than outrun jets. It had reached inside their systems, silencing machines, and stripping them of what American intelligence agencies, including the Defense Intelligence Agency, quietly gathered testimonies from radar reports and ground witnesses. Their conclusions were unanimous. Something extraordinary had occurred in Tehran's skies. In the city itself, whispers spread like wildfire. Children cupped their hands, mimicking glowing spheres. Taxi drivers debated whether this was Soviet technology or something far more mysterious. Housewives spoke of an orb descending into the desert, claiming they could still see its lingering glow if they stared long enough at the horizon. Among pilots and officers, the mood was darker and more haunting. These were warriors trained for combat, equipped with supersonic jets and heat-seeking missiles, yet they had been rendered completely powerless. The object hadn't shown aggression but something far more chilling: total control. It demonstrated dominance by neutralizing their systems with an unseen switch. In the aftermath, the psychological toll became evident. One pilot suffered recurring nightmares, waking drenched in sweat, convinced a smaller orb hovered at his bedside. His wife noticed his hair had seemingly turned grey overnight. Another pilot admitted he could no longer look at the night sky without scanning for that pulsing glow. At Marabad's control tower, technicians reviewed their logs with growing unease. Radar had captured impossible blips, darting impossibly fast across screens before vanishing mid-sweep. One technician refused to touch the console at night, convinced the glowing sphere had somehow looked back through the green-lit scope. "I will come back," something seemed to whisper. It wasn't finished. The day rolled on with its usual rhythm. Streets bustled with traffic, and life resumed its pattern. But for those who witnessed the events of September 19th, normalcy felt like a thin veneer, ready to crack at any moment. Behind closed doors, officers compiled their reports. The Americans carefully filed their documents away. Whispers circulated briefly before fading into rumor, yet the pilots carried a burden that would not dissipate. They had encountered something beyond earthly comprehension. In mere seconds, their most advanced systems were rendered useless. An unspoken understanding hung between them. If this unknown force chose to attack, humanity would stand defenseless. Official channels began to move. The Iranian Air Force shared findings with senior officers, who then briefed their allies. Simultaneously, the United States discreetly archived its intelligence summaries. Within weeks, what had been a mere rumor transformed into classified material, secured behind steel locks and confidential binders. The Defense Intelligence Agency's report was stark and direct. It detailed extraordinary capabilities: power disruptions, disabled weapon systems, radar anomalies. The credibility was undeniable, supported by trained fighter pilots, radar controllers, and ground observers. This was no isolated, questionable sighting, but a documented event supported by multiple data streams. Despite the incident's significance, no explanations emerged. Neither Americans nor Soviets acknowledged possessing such technology. Project Blue Book simply labeled the Tehran incident as unexplained, a blank space where understanding should reside. For the pilots, official documents meant nothing. They remembered the terrifying moment when an inexplicable orb split the sky, rushing toward them with bullet-like speed. Their cockpits had gone silent, weapons rendered useless. Years later, one F-4 crewman recalled nearly freezing in pure fear as the smaller orb approached. "I thought we were finished," he admitted. "You don't understand your own vulnerability until the sky itself demonstrates it." Another spoke of waking to static-filled nights, momentarily convinced of some impending doom, a memory that would never truly fade. Not The radio had gone silent again. Soldiers stationed at guard posts around Tehran began reporting strange lights in the weeks that followed. Most observations were quickly dismissed as stars, aircraft, or imagination sparked by the September event. Yet each report contributed to a growing sense of unease. No one could say with certainty whether the object would return or if it had ever truly departed. Witnesses spoke of a smaller orb descending, glowing softly above the desert floor. Investigators thoroughly searched the area but found nothing. No scorched ground, no debris, no radiation. Just an empty, silent expanse stretching beneath the sun. Some locals maintained that on certain nights, if you stood in the right spot and watched long enough, a faint glow would appear on the horizon. Decades passed, but the case never lost its intrigue. UFO researchers continually revisited the incident, highlighting its compelling nature. Multiple trained observers, radar confirmations, equipment failures, and physiological effects on pilots gave the case remarkable credibility. It seemed perfect, except for the lack of concrete proof. No wreckage, no photographs, only testimonies and reports. But these were testimonies of the highest caliber. Skeptics attempted to offer alternative explanations. Bright stars, psychological stress, faulty instruments. Yet none of these could adequately explain the observed phenomena. Stars do not split into orbs and chase jets. Psychological stress does not leave radar traces. Faulty instruments do not synchronize across multiple systems and then spontaneously restore themselves. For those who experienced the event, these arguments meant nothing. They knew what they had seen and felt. Into the 1980s and 1990s, veterans spoke with a quiet, persistent dread. The object had demonstrated intelligence and power beyond human comprehension. It had shown complete control over Paya, machines designed to dominate the skies, then departed without harm or explanation, as if making a deliberate statement. Some interpreted the incident as a test, a demonstration, or a reminder, like a predator circling and showing its teeth without striking. By the time the case was declassified in the West, it had become legendary. The Tan UFO incident was cited in books, documentaries, and lectures as one of the strongest cases in modern history. Not because it provided answers, but because it steadfastly refused to do so. In its wake, it left trained pilots scanning the skies, governments compiling extensive reports, and civilians whispering about lights that split and disappeared, an enduring mystery that continued to challenge understanding. The sky changed over Melbourne that morning in April 1966. At Westall High School, recess was in full swing. Warm air filled the playground, alive with children's laughter and shouting. Teachers clustered in small groups, chatting casually while keeping watch. Suddenly, someone pointed upward. Initially, students thought it was an airplane, silver, gleaming, moving against the blue sky. But something felt off. The object wasn't flying normally. It slid and drifted, almost gliding without effort. Kids squinted, shading their eyes as whispers began to spread. What is that? It's too low. It can't be a plane. The object was a dull grey saucer shaped with a broad middle and domed top. It shifted in the sky, seeming to test its own weight. Some claimed it glowed softly around the edges. Others insisted it moved in complete silence, like a phantom drifting above the treetops. Then it dipped lower. Children's chatter transformed into gasps and shrieks. Dozens ran to the oval's edge, pointing and calling teachers. The object tilted and descended toward the Grange, a rough patch of scrubland beyond the schoolyard. For a brief moment, the saucer hovered just above the grass. Witnesses would later describe it as balancing on nothing, with the air rippling around it. Years later, at Maribad International Airport, the night of 1976 still haunts some controllers. They remember phones ringing frantically. They remember stepping outside to see a light brighter than any star, steady, unblinking in the sky. Pilots' voices, initially calm, began to crack with fear as their machines went dead. On clear nights, when the desert horizon glows softly with starlight, these witnesses still look north. Not because they expect to see it again, but because once you've witnessed the sky behave so strangely, trust is forever altered. The Ton UFO never returned, at least not in any way anyone has dared to acknowledge. Yet the silence left behind carries a heavy question. If it came once, why wouldn't it come again? And if it does, could anyone stop it? Don't the children burst into a run, their shoes pounding dirt paths? Voices rose with excitement and fear, as they raced toward an unknown destination. Teachers shouted for them to stop, but curiosity had already taken hold. Dozens of kids surged forward, cutting through fences and brush. When they reached the clearing, the saucer sat low to the ground, its surface gleaming faintly in sunlight. Descriptions varied wildly. Some said it was the size of 2 cars, others claimed it was much larger. The air felt different, metallic and sharp. Some children hung back at the edge of the scrub, clutching branches in fear. Others stepped closer, only yards away from the strange machine. A boy felt static crawling across his skin, while a girl would later describe an eerie silence. The birds had stopped singing, and the air seemed to have gone still. Without warning, the object lifted. It rose smoothly without noise or thrust, as if gravity had suddenly loosened its grip. Children screamed, some falling backward into the saucer tilted, hovering above the scrub for a breathless moment before shooting upward with impossible speed. In seconds, it was gone, a blur vanishing into the blue sky. The field lay quiet. Grass bent in strange directions where the object had rested. A circular pattern of flattened vegetation marked the spot, with stems scorched and twisted as if pressed by immense heat. The children clustered around, pointing and whispering, some laughing nervously, others wide-eyed with shock. But the encounter wasn't over. As they stood in the clearing, a second object appeared in the sky. Smaller and brighter, it darted across the horizon before streaking out of sight. A few kids claimed there were 3 in total, weaving together like birds in flight. By the time teachers arrived, breathless and angry from chasing students, the sky was empty again. All that remained was the circle in the grass, a lingering smell, and dozens of children babbling about flying saucers. Recess ended in chaos. Classrooms filled with tumbling voices telling their stories. It was silver, it was round, it landed. Some teachers dismissed it as hysteria. Others, visibly shaken, said nothing. Nothing. A handful had witnessed something extraordinary, and they knew this was no trick of imagination. Word spread quickly beyond the schoolyard by the afternoon. Parents arriving to collect their children heard frantic stories about saucers and glowing objects. Some listened with indulgent smiles, while others grew unsettled by the consistent accounts. Before the school day concluded, unfamiliar men in dark suits appeared on the grounds. They spoke quietly with the headmaster, their eyes scanning the gathered students. Teachers were instructed to maintain order, and children were told to stay silent. The once lively circle in the grass became a forbidden zone. For the westall students, the morning's wonder transformed into something more ominous. They had seen something impossible, but the adults were already working to suppress their experience. As the sun set over Melbourne, the grass circle grew darker, holding its secrets. The following day, unease replaced excitement at Westall High School. Children arrived, whispering, tugging at sleeves, and scanning the sky as if expecting the mysterious craft to return. Parents lingered at the gates, searching teachers' faces for reassurance that never came. Classrooms buzzed with detailed accounts. Every child contributed to the narrative. A silver disc tilting in the air, hovering above the scrub, leaving a ring of flattened grass. Some claimed multiple crafts, while others described feeling electrical tension and smelling a strange metallic odor. The specifics varied, but the core experience remained consistent. Teachers attempted to redirect attention to lessons, yet they too found themselves glancing toward the windows. A few had caught brief glimpses themselves, a gleam against the sky, a silent descent. They spoke carefully, offering neither confirmation nor denial. By mid-morning, men in dark suits returned, their cars parked with deliberate precision outside the school. Clipboard-wielding officials moved briskly between rooms, interviewing children. Some students returned pale and silent, others visibly frightened, all bearing the weight of an unexplained encounter. Of an extraordinary event that would haunt its students for years. Something had happened at Grange, a scrubby field where children claimed a saucer had landed, leaving behind a perfect scorched circle in the grass. The headmaster's response was swift and uncompromising. He assembled the school in the main hall, his tone firm and almost harsh. The children must not tell stories, he insisted. Nothing unusual had happened. Flying saucers did not exist, and anyone spreading tales would face punishment. His words fell like cold water, silencing the crowd. But in the back rows, dozens of eyes widened in disbelief. They knew what they had seen. Children who snuck out during lunch break described the circle in vivid detail. The vegetation was flattened in a perfect ring, scorched at the center. Some collected grass samples, bringing blackened, brittle stems home to show their parents. By evening, the scene had changed dramatically. Workers in unidentified uniforms cordoned off the area. Trucks came and went, and the circle was trampled, scraped, and erased. Yet, the story only grew louder. Local newspapers began picking up whispers from parents. One reporter visited the school hoping for interviews, but was firmly told nothing had occurred. He managed to speak with a few children outside the gates, their voices hushed but insistent. "We saw it. A saucer. It landed." The brief article was enough to spark rumors across Melbourne. In the weeks that followed, Westall's children were haunted by their experience. Some dreamed of the saucer's grey body descending into the scrub. Others woke sweating, convinced they could still see it hovering above their homes. One girl claimed she'd felt the craft speak inside her mind, though she couldn't explain its message. Terrified of punishment, she begged her parents to keep her secret. Betty, a student who stood yards from the landing site, remembered the eerie silence of the birds and the heavy air. She recalled how fast it shot upward, vanishing without sound. Years later she would whisper, "It wasn't human." The adults remained silent. Teachers who had witnessed the event kept their accounts private, fearful of their jobs. Some later admitted being visited at home by officials who warned them against speaking out. A moment frozen in time haunted the students long after that April day in 1966. The science teacher who had run alongside the children that day never spoke publicly about what happened, going pale and breaking his voice as he ordered them back to school. Left to piece together the story, the children whispered behind lockers and passed scribbled notes during lessons. They preserved what the adults wanted erased, drawing sketches of discs and rings of fire, comparing memories and arguing over details. The fear of punishment only deepened their conviction that what they had witnessed was real and being hidden. The physical evidence slowly disappeared. The trampled scrub regrew, erasing the most obvious trace. Yet in their memories, the mark remained vivid. A perfect ring where something had touched down briefly before vanishing into the sky. By summer, Melbourne had moved on, and the headlines faded. But for these children, now teenagers, the memory remained alive, a secret carried with the weight of the unexplainable. When they walked past the scrub, they glanced sideways, imagining the saucer descending again. The sky held the shimmer of metal against blue, a constant reminder. The world outside dismissed their experience, but inside the school, silence became its own truth. They learned quickly that what they saw was real, but not to be spoken of. This silence was more frightening than the saucer itself, suggesting someone knew more and wanted them to forget. Years passed. The children grew older, found jobs, built families, yet the memory of that April day never softened. It clung like a shadow, the image of the saucer dropping into the scrubland, etched into their minds. At reunions or chance meetings, the US now subject would surface in whispers. "Do you remember? Did you see it too?" The answer was always the same. Yes, but in public, most kept quiet. The fear of ridicule and punishment lingered long after the headmaster's warning. Those who tried to speak up were brushed off. Adults claimed they'd imagined it, mistaken a weather balloon, or been swept up in hysteria. Yet none of these explanations accounted for the circle in the grass or the teachers who had seen it and then fallen silent. Some carried the memory like a wound, unhealed and unexplained. A strange event haunted multiple witnesses well into their later years. As children, they'd heard a pounding noise and felt something descending outside their windows. One woman carried nightmares throughout her adulthood, always waking before the object touched down, her sheets soaked with sweat. For some, the encounter profoundly shaped their lives. A boy who watched the craft rise from a fence eventually became a scientist. "It made me want to understand what was possible," he reflected. "But it also revealed how much we don't comprehend, and that stayed with me." Decades later, researchers reopened the case. In the early 2000s, they tracked down former students, now in their 50s, seeking their recollections. Their findings were extraordinary. Dozens of adults remained steadfast about what they'd witnessed as children. A silver-grey saucer, hovering, descending, leaving a grass ring before shooting skyward at impossible speed. Some testimonies were gut-wrenching. One former student whispered, But how do you erase something like that? Others described men in suits visiting their homes, warning parents to keep their children silent. Teachers, too, finally spoke out. A retired science teacher admitted seeing the saucer that day and being explicitly warned never to discuss it. The landscape changed over time, scrubland cleared in some areas, overgrown in others. The grass circle vanished, erased by time. But the witnesses' memories remained sharp. Their testimonies painted a chilling picture of a mass daylight sighting involving over 200 students and staff, and an apparent systematic attempt to suppress the truth. The Westall encounter became local legend in Melbourne, passed through generations. Today, locals will tell you exactly where it happened. For the witnesses, the memory remains more vivid than rumor, a moment etched into their consciousness, defying attempts to silence their experience. No, here's a rewritten version. On a September morning in 1994, the sky above Rua was wide and blue, stretching over scrub and gum trees. Heat made the air wavy. It was recess at the aerial school, a moment when children typically burst outside like bright birds, shouting, trading snacks, kicking dust. 60 children were scattered across the playground, its edges blending into surrounding bush. Teachers were inside at a staff meeting, leaving the grounds entirely to the kids. No one was watching the horizon. At first, it was just a flicker, the kind of glint you might mistake for a bottle or distant car windshield catching sunlight. But this light didn't move like a normal object. It hovered, skipped, then drifted sideways, smooth as a thought. A few children shaded their eyes and pointed. Others continued playing, the way kids do when something might be nothing. Shrieks and laughter thinned as the first few went quiet. Heads tilted upward, squinting. The light grew brighter. Then it wasn't one light, but 2 or 3, hard to distinguish because they moved like fish beneath water, darting and circling without sound. No engines, no rotors. Classmates screamed. A strange hush fell when the object lifted into the sky. They remember the fear in their teachers' voices. The way adults tried so hard to force it into nothing, they remember because forgetting was never possible. Half a century later, questions remain. Why did it come? Why land near a schoolyard in full view of children? Why appear so openly only to vanish? And why did officials move so quickly to erase every trace? Some believe it was a test gone wrong, an experimental craft that descended too low and was witnessed by too many. Others insist it was not human at all, that what touched down that day was a visitor from elsewhere. The truth has never been confirmed, but the witnesses are certain of one thing. They saw what they saw. The memory does not fade. It sits in the mind like a scar, flaring in moments of quiet, in dreams, in the gaze toward a clear blue sky. It sits in the silence left behind by men in dark suits, by teachers too afraid to speak, by governments that turn mysteries into secrets. And on quiet mornings in Melbourne, when fields shimmer in the heat and birds fall silent for no reason at all, some say it feels as though the air itself is remembering too. Remembering the morning when hundreds of eyes looked up and saw the sky open to something it was never meant to show. Wind whispered across grass, and insects droned from nearby bushes. Someone called out to a friend. A nervous giggle broke the quiet. Suddenly the field felt too exposed, the shade too distant. "Do you see it?" a girl whispered. Without drama or speed, I settled toward the scrub at the school ground's edge, where the fence sagged and trees clustered darkly. Something smooth and bright slipped behind the foliage, leaving a sense of sudden occupation, like a sea you believed empty until someone breathed beside you. Chatter dissolved into an uneasy silence. A boy started walking toward the fence. 2 girls followed, then 3 more, drifting as if pulled by an invisible tide. Feet scuffed the dry ground. With each step, the air grew thinner, quieter, as if the day itself held its breath. A smaller child tugged a friend's sleeve. "Don't go," they warned. But those in front pressed on, curiosity edging out fear. At the fence line, the scrub looked ordinary. Broom grass, low bushes, patches of sun and shadow. Then they saw it, not a plane, not a helicopter, nothing they could name. A rounded object nestled between bushes, metal bright and wrong. Its surface too pristine for the dusty world around it. Not bus large, but substantial, car wide, hut tall, a gleaming thing that didn't belong. Something moved nearby. Small, barely taller than the older kids, with a head seemingly oversized and eyes storm cloud-colored. Its body was narrow, limbs slight, hands hanging with an uncertain looseness. When it turned, facing the children, even the bravest forgot how to swallow. A second figure appeared, drifting more than walking, like a self-moving shadow. The air felt strange, layered with heat that made leaves shiver without wind. A boy stepped back. The fence wire sang a thin metallic note. Another kid gripped the wooden post, palms sweating. The children stood along the fence, bodies pressed tight against the thin wires as if they could hold back whatever was watching them. No one called for a teacher. The idea of help felt distant and soft, like a memory from another kind of day. An owl-like head tilted slowly, deliberately studying them. The figure glided closer, not lunging but moving with a smooth approach that made several kids gasp. It stopped just a few paces from the fence, its gaze fixed. Breathing became shallow, then seemed to stop entirely. The world narrowed to eyes, theirs and its, and the tiny sounds that suddenly seemed enormous. A bead bracelet knocking against a wrist bone, a shoelace rasping, a dry swallow. A younger child began to cry, a thin, high sound that didn't carry far. Another girl put her arm around the crying child and whispered, "Shh," though she couldn't hear her own voice. Then something stranger happened. A feeling crept in, a pressure at the edge of thought, as if someone were knocking softly from inside their skulls. Not exactly a voice, but words formed deeper than ears could hear. "Be careful. Or maybe this is dangerous." The meaning came like a shape they saw without seeing, an image pressed into their minds. Machines, wires, screens, forests turning to stubble, the earth's last breath. One girl took a half step forward, fence wires humming against her knees. The figure's huge eyes caught the light and reflected it back. Time stretched, seconds feeling like minutes, minutes like a held musical note. A second figure hovered nearby, watching the first as if waiting for some signal. The craft itself gave off no smoke, no sound, but calling it silent would be a mistake. This silence was active, thick like the pause in a story just before the part that makes you shiver. A boy whispered, "It's going to come over," and suddenly the fence felt as fragile as a ribbon. The first figure shifted again. A scrape of shoe on dirt set off a chain reaction. Half the children flinched backward. The other half leaned in, fascination climbing their hearts. A soft breeze arrived, bringing the smell of dust and eucalyptus, a momentary relief. Note a laugh from the main yard carried the edge of something far away, hinting that behind this moment the world remained ordinary. Children turned toward the sound, as if the laughter might somehow reel them back to safety. When they looked forward again, the figure had moved closer, a pace no one had seen it take. Pressure sharpened inside their heads, transforming into pictures rather than words. Machines churning, screens flickering, something hot and invisible unspooling into the air. A warning emerged, not cruel, not angry, but like a road signaling its own abrupt ending. Later, several kids would describe this feeling identically, not from comparing stories, but because the sensation had only one possible shape. Younger children began edging away from the fence, their trembling bodies herding them backwards. A few older kids remained, not from courage, but pinned by pure awe. They watched the figure's mouth, if it could be called a mouth, move slightly, producing no sound. Huge eyes blinked slowly, ancient and patient as animals. Their own hands, clutching the fence, went bloodless at the knuckles. Something shifted. A soundless hum, a tilt of the day. The second figure slid back toward the craft, as if pulled by an invisible string. The first lingered, head cocked, eyes fixed on the children. Pressure softened, not vanishing, but lifting like a cloud moving from the sun. Someone would later say it felt like being released from an unknown thought. A teacher's door banged in the distance. The spell cracked. Children turned their heads. The figure looked toward the noise. A quick, precise motion, then back to the faces at the fence. For a heartbeat, the world balanced. School and bush, laughter and warning, morning, and something that didn't belong to morning at all. Then the figure glided backward, unhurried, and the shining object drew it in like a water droplet. Leaves shivered though the air remained still. Light brightened just once, leaving a white smear in their eyes. The craft rose without thrust or roar, but with the quiet certainty of a completed thought. It ascended above the scrub, paused as if contemplating the blue, then tipped and slid away. A clean line dwindling to a glint, and the glint to nothing. The children stood, fingers hooked in the fence, breathing again. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else began. The children burst back to class after recess, their chatter fading. Faces flushed and wild, they carried something unspoken. The teachers sensed it immediately. Something was different. When asked why they were late, their answers fractured. How could they explain a morning that held two worlds? In the corridor, a girl stood motionless, her hand flat against the wall, listening to something beneath the floorboards. At a small school in Zimbabwe, 60 children had just experienced a moment that would become a story whispered around fires. The warning lingered like heat, like a seed waiting to grow sharper. Not all children could move when the bell rang. Some stayed near the fence, glancing back at the scrub where something gleaming had been moments earlier. Others walked to classrooms in silence, their hearts racing, faces pale. The sky remained hot and bright, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. The teachers quickly noticed the unusual atmosphere. Children were restless, their conversations punctuated by sudden silences. Fragments emerged. We saw something. There was a thing in the bush. There were men, not men. Initially, adults dismissed it as childhood imagination. But the fear sounded too real. By day's end, children clung to teachers and parents. One girl refused to walk home through the bush, insisting unseen eyes were watching. A boy wept silently, unable to explain his terror. That night, the story spread across Rua. Parents heard consistent accounts from their children, a shining object, beings with enormous heads and eyes, silent mental warnings of danger. Some described apocalyptic visions, burning trees, thinning air, Earth's destruction. Others simply said the beings had communicated wordless warnings about the world. The children at Ariel School couldn't stop talking about what they'd seen. Their stories were eerily similar, repeated with a consistency that unnerved the adults around them. When teachers allowed the students to draw their experiences, something extraordinary emerged. Paper after paper showed the same details. Round discs, strange crafts, figures with massive heads and deep black almond-shaped eyes. Some drawings included trees and fences to show scale, revealing creatures almost as tall as the children themselves. The eyes were particularly haunting, dark ovals that seemed to consume entire faces. Teachers comparing the artwork found the repetition impossible to ignore. Dozens of children from different classes had produced nearly identical images, with only minor variations in detail. Rumors spread quickly. Parents whispered, teachers talked, and soon reporters arrived from Harare, notebooks ready. They interviewed the children separately, finding each account remarkably consistent. No child contradicted another. No hesitation marked their stories. Investigators soon followed. Cynthia Hind, Africa's leading UFO researcher, carefully interviewed each child individually. Dr. Torcry interviewed it. Dr. Child, D. John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist experienced in studying alien encounter claims, also traveled to Zimbabwe. He met with the children, noting their body language and listening to their accounts. What made this case extraordinary was the sheer number of witnesses. 60 children describing the same impossible event. Some spoke of floating beings, others of stiff movements. Many mentioned a silent message about the Earth. One child told Mac, "I was scared because I have never seen such a person like that." Another whispered about feeling a communication regarding trees. The children's descriptions were too vivid, too consistent to dismiss. Their pale faces and trembling hands suggested something profound had happened, something that defied easy explanation. The encounter at the school playground lingered far beyond that morning in 1994. What began as a collective experience among children became a memory that refused to fade, etching itself into their consciousness with an intensity that defied simple explanation. Teachers who initially dismissed the children's accounts gradually acknowledged something profound had occurred. Skeptics proposed theories: mass hysteria, Western UFO influences, optical illusions, but none could adequately explain the children's consistent testimonies, their drawings, or the quiet terror in their eyes. The bush at the fence line remained ordinary. Trees swayed, sunlight filtered through, yet the ground felt different. Something had changed, though nothing visible had transformed. In classrooms, whispers continued. The children weren't seeking attention or entertainment, but desperately wanted someone to understand the warning imprinted on their young minds. As years passed, those children grew into adults. Universities, jobs, families came and went, but the memory of that morning remained, like a scar that might fade but never completely disappear. Some tried to bury the story, afraid of ridicule. One woman, who was 9 at the time, admitted she had stayed silent for years, haunted by the eyes she could never forget. Many carried the warning into adulthood. Dreams of burning forests and a dying earth persisted. The message was clear, though wordless. The earth is fragile, the future dangerous, and something, or someone, wanted them to know. What remained most striking wasn't the craft, the beings, or even the fear. It was a silent communication, a message pressed into young minds with an urgency that transcended conventional understanding. The psychiatrist who first heard their stories noted their sincerity, how emotion surfaced without artifice. While children are prone to fantasy, this experience seemed different, a collective vision too precise to be dismissed. Some children couldn't sleep, others saw the being's eyes in their dreams, a constant reminder of the warning. The story became more than an incident. It was a shared experience that marked them deeply, a memory that would define their understanding of the world. Dr. John Mack often spoke about the aerial school encounter as one of the most compelling cases he had investigated before his untimely death in 2004. The children's testimonies remained strikingly consistent over time, their emotional truth intact even as they grew older. More than just a sighting, this experience fundamentally changed them. Some children found themselves haunted by memories that refused to fade. Nights were spent staring at ceilings, feeling watched. Dreams became vivid landscapes where silent beings stood at the foot of their beds, eyes glowing in the darkness. One woman's whisper captured the profound impact. "It's like the sky is alive, like it remembers me." Her words spoke to a deeper transformation that went beyond a simple encounter. Skeptics pushed back hard. Psychologists labeled it mass suggestion. Journalists called it alien hysteria, dismissing the accounts as cultural contagion. Yet the witnesses, now adults, remained unshaken. "You can call it what you want," one declared. "I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. This wasn't a dream. It was real." The playground itself seemed to hold memories. The fence was replaced. Trees grew taller. Countless games and footsteps weathered the grounds. But those who had been there swore the place felt different, as though the soil had absorbed something fundamental and irretrievable. Some of those children, now parents, would bring their own kids to the site, standing quietly by the fence, wrestling with unspoken emotions. Cynthia Hind, the UFO researcher who first documented the case, preserved the drawings, recordings, and testimonies. Her files became part of a broader archive studied by believers and skeptics alike. What made this incident extraordinary was its scale. Too many witnesses, too young, too consistent to dismiss easily. For the witnesses themselves, certainty remained elusive. Some believed they had seen beings from another world. Others weren't sure. Perhaps they had glimpsed something even stranger, something hidden, emerging from this earth for reasons beyond their understanding. One thing had happened. A marker was left, a message echoed for decades. Years after the event, one of the girls, now grown, spoke in an interview. Her voice was barely a whisper. She looked away from the camera. This wasn't just about them. This wasn't simply a visit. It felt like a warning about who they were becoming, as if someone was saying, "Look at what you're doing. Look at what you're becoming." A heavy silence filled the room after her words. The same silence that had settled on the playground that day in 1994. It was expectant, the kind of quiet that makes you lean closer, sensing that the next sound might change everything. And so the story remains. Not a hoax, not a fantasy. This was a moment caught between worlds. 60 children stood at a fence, staring into eyes that didn't belong to Earth. They felt the weight of a warning that might not have been meant only for them. Even now, locals say the wind moving through the gum trees on the old playground carries a unique hush, a hush that makes you remember the morning sky, the gleam behind the scrub, the eyes that never looked away. A whisper that cautions, be careful. The main journey may have ended, but more stories wait, Rare encounters told in hushed tones, like the Lotho Air Force Base incident, September 1995, Maseru, Lesotho. A guard at Mitalana Air Base shifted his rifle, rubbing the cold from his hands. The night was quiet. Crickets filled the grass beyond the fence, and a distant dog barked in the hills outside Maseru. Out of habit, he scanned the perimeter. That's when he saw it. A sphere of light hovered above the restricted zone. It glowed steadily, its surface pulsing with a whitish-gold radiance that seemed to breathe. At first, he thought it might be a South African helicopter, but there was no engine, no rotor wash, no vibration in the air. The night's silence remained untouched, which made the sight even more alarming. He called for the next century. Together they watched as the light slid sideways with an impossible smoothness. Almost casually, a second orb appeared. Moments later, a third. The three formed a triangle above the runways, as if the base itself had become their point of interest. The guards stiffened. Aircraft lined the hangars below. This was Lotho's only base. No, an air wing gathered, small but resolute. Clearance was mandatory, and within minutes of a radio call, officers emerged with binoculars. They lifted their lenses toward the sky and fell silent. 3 orbs pulsed in the sky, their light rising and dimming like a heartbeat. Sometimes one would drift forward, with the others following in perfect synchronization. Then all 3 would freeze motionless against the backdrop. To trained military personnel, the precision was unmistakable. These were not random phenomena like meteors or flares, but objects holding formation with clear intent. Witnesses later described each orb as being between 1 and 2 meters across. Their light wasn't blinding, yet strong enough to bathe the concrete runway in a pale white glow. Hangar doors reflected faintly, and one mechanic noted the light was bright enough to make his tools shine as if placed under a lamp. The descent began with 2 orbs lowering to hover just 100 meters above ground. Their glow intensified, forcing guards to shield their eyes. An officer whispered that it felt like the lights were systematically scanning the base, inspecting every structure and person. Beyond the base, civilians were also witnessing the event. Farmers tending late cattle and families outside their homes initially mistook the lights for stars. But soon they saw the objects sift into triangles and lines, some comparing them to searchlights without actual beams. A taxi driver would later describe the glow reflecting across his roof, turning the metal pale white. Villagers reported surreal details, cattle frozen in fields, shadows stretching unnaturally long beneath the hovering orbs. Children clung to their parents, asking about the white objects above the capital. Inside the base, tension mounted. The commander and officers debated whether to scramble their few fighter planes. Ultimately, they decided against engagement. The lights were too fast, too unpredictable. Attempting to confront them risked potential humiliation or destruction. Instead, ground patrols were dispatched. Soldiers moved carefully along the perimeter, rifles ready, eyes fixed skyward. Radio communications crackled with terse updates. 2 objects moving west, still hovering, still silent. No matter how the patrol repositioned, the orbs remained directly overhead, seemingly unaffected by human presence. For nearly an hour, they maintained their enigmatic vigil. The sky above Lotho had been ordinary until that night. Something strange happened that left everyone unsettled. Pilots not on duty were desperate to understand what occurred. Mechanics spoke of hangars glowing with white light, while guards admitted feeling powerless despite holding rifles. One guard later reflected, what use were weapons against lights moving like that? The base was buzzing with unease the following morning. An official report was drafted with careful, measured language. Unidentified aerial lights observed, movements intelligent, duration prolonged, no conventional explanation. Civilians told wilder stories. Taxi drivers spoke of white stars descending. Farmers described cattle frozen in an otherworldly glow. A woman claimed her children cried through the night, believing the lights were spirits. Rumors spread quickly through markets and homes, taking on a life of their own. South African newspapers soon picked up the story. The Star in Johannesburg reported strange aerial objects over Maseru, citing sources in the Lotho Air Force. The government remained silent, offering no further explanation. Yet the consistency of accounts was striking. From guards and officers to villagers and civilians, everyone described the same phenomenon, Spherical lights, silent and steady, moving in perfect formation before vanishing upward at impossible speed. One officer privately admitted he had considered scrambling the base's planes but realized the futility. "We would have embarrassed ourselves," he said. "They were faster than anything we had. We could do nothing but watch." For a base tasked with defending the nation's skies, this realization was profoundly sobering. In the days that followed, Ministry of Defense investigators arrived quietly. Guards were questioned, officers asked to sketch what they had seen. Some men recalled being shown radar logs, though they were never told the results. Soil samples were collected beyond the fences, but no report was ever published. The story, however, continued to live on. At the Lotho Air Force Base, something extraordinary happened. When the impossible became real. Lights appeared over a military installation, hovering silently in ways no known aircraft could. Military personnel and civilians alike witnessed the event, each experiencing a mix of awe and unease. The orbs defied explanation. Pilots, who normally commanded the skies, felt powerless. Mechanics recalled the hangars illuminated as if under intense light. Guards gripped their rifles, suddenly aware of their own vulnerability. Skeptics proposed various theories, flares, helicopters, meteors, but each explanation fell apart under scrutiny. Flares don't hover silently for an hour. Helicopters make noise, yet no sound was heard. Meteors don't halt mid-air, pulse, and then climb away. For those who stood beneath these lights, conventional explanations meant nothing. The Lotho Air Force responded with complete silence. No press conferences, no further reports, just an initial acknowledgement followed by total quiet. But memories persisted. Families in the hills remembered faintly glowing fields. Children recalled the fear on their parents' faces. Taxi drivers remembered passengers straining to see. Soldiers remembered standing on the tarmac, staring at lights that shouldn't exist. This incident became more than just a local story. It echoed patterns seen worldwide. Silent orbs above sensitive locations, precise movements, and sudden departures. Similar encounters in places like Norway's Heston Valley suggested this was not an isolated event. For Lotho, the story became a whispered rumor passed quietly through years, but absent from official records. Yet for those who were present, guards with binoculars, villagers in fields, children on doorsteps, the experience remained vivid, undeniable, and unresolved. The lights came without warning. They hovered above a base designed to guard the skies. They lingered long enough to etch themselves into memory. And then they left, vanishing into silence. Unexplained lights have haunted travelers across the Australian outback and the Texas skies of Marfa for decades. Even the world's most advanced militaries have recently acknowledged objects crossing restricted airspace that defy explanation. Such events transcend borders, technology, and national strength. In 1995, lights appearing over Mizoru joined a global legacy of mysterious phenomena. They hovered, observed, and departed, leaving behind only silence. A powerful reminder that the mysteries of the skies belong to everyone. The endurance of such stories stems not from official reports or sensational headlines, but from the profound silence that follows. The silence of armed personnel powerless to intervene, the silence of families watching in awe, the silence of a government offering no explanations. What remains is memory. A fleeting glow above a single airbase, the unsettling realization that for one night, the skies no longer belonged to those who thought they controlled them. The Rendlesham Forest incident stands as a watershed moment in UFO history. On Christmas night in 1980, at RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk, England, 2 United States Air Force security personnel patrolling the base perimeter noticed strange lights descending into the nearby forest. These were not ordinary bases. RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters, operated by the US Air Force under a NATO agreement, housed advanced weaponry and surveillance equipment during the Cold War's height. The 81st Tactical Fighter Wing maintained these among the most heavily guarded sites in the UK. Around 3 a.m. on December 26, Airman First Class John Burrows and Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston were dispatched to investigate reported unusual lights. Expecting perhaps a downed aircraft, they instead encountered a structured object emitting a bluish-white light, hovering silently among the trees. Both witnesses underwent detailed interviews, including hypnosis, to recover additional recollections about the incident. The object, as described, was metallic with a roughly triangular shape, measuring 10 feet long by 8 feet high. Strange symbols, reminiscent of hieroglyphics, were etched across its surface. An unusual atmospheric condition surrounded the encounter. Witnesses reported an electrically charged environment where time seemed to distort. Watches malfunctioned and radios filled with static. During the encounter, Peniston claimed he touched the craft and meticulously documented his observations, creating sketches and notes in a logbook that included the mysterious symbols. Suddenly, the craft lifted vertically and vanished through the forest canopy. Following the incident, base security personnel returned to investigate. They discovered 3 small indentations arranged in a triangular formation on the forest floor, precisely matching the suspected landing gear positions. Tree branches showed signs of damage, with some broken or singed. Geiger counters brought by the disaster preparedness team detected elevated radiation levels. These readings peaked at the points of the ground indentations and on a tree trunk where the craft was reported to have made contact. The events continued on December 28th when Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt led a second investigative team into the forest after additional reports of unusual lights. Carrying a handheld tape recorder, Holt generated an 18-minute audio recording that would become a critical piece of evidence. The recording captured real-time observations of moving lights weaving through trees, beaming down to the ground, and splitting into multiple objects. Holt's narration, while initially calm, grew increasingly tense. His audio documentation described objects moving with apparent intelligence, dodging trees, hovering in formation, and even directing beams toward the weapons storage area. Officially documenting the encounter, Holt's memo, later released under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act, described the event as an unidentified flying object encounter. The document circulated through both British Ministry of Defense and U.S. Air Force channels. Over subsequent years, multiple eyewitnesses corroborated the night's events. Master Sergeant Munro Neville, who operated the Geiger counter during the investigation, confirmed the elevated radiation readings, lending further credibility to the extraordinary account. The Rendlesham Forest incident stands out as a remarkable event in military UFO history, bolstered by its credibility through official documentation and high-ranking military personnel. Testimony. Colonel Holt, second in command of a major NATO airbase, provided on-the-record accounts that risked his career, not anonymous claims but carefully documented observations. Multiple trained military witnesses reported extraordinary events across several nights, including physical trace evidence, confirmed radar movements, and unusual radiation readings. These accounts challenged alternative explanations proposed by skeptics such as lighthouse beam misidentifications or atmospheric star distortions. One particularly controversial aspect involves Staff Sergeant Peniston's claim of receiving a binary code transmission during the encounter. Years after the incident, under hypnosis, Peniston disclosed a sequence of ones and zeros that he believed he had received. When analyzed, this code supposedly pointed to coordinates of significant ancient sites worldwide, including the Great Pyramid, Nazca Lines, and Temple of Apollo. In 2010, additional witness testimony emerged. Colonel Conrad, the base's commanding officer during the incident, confirmed something unusual had occurred. While cautious about labeling the event a definitive UFO encounter, he did not dispute the essential facts documented in patrol reports. The British Ministry of Defense initially investigated but ultimately claimed the event posed no defense significance, a conclusion many interpreted as a political maneuver to avoid international tensions during the Cold War. Verstenza, present during Holt's second forest visit, later supported claims that objects in the sky seemed to respond to the soldiers' presence. Local witnesses who had been stationed at the base for years disputed the lighthouse theory, noting their intimate familiarity with its rotation pattern and visibility. Despite ongoing skepticism, the incident remains a complex and intriguing chapter in UFO research, characterized by multiple credible military testimonies and unexplained phenomena. By 2009, the Rendlesham case had become a pivotal moment in UFO research, standing as the most comprehensively documented military UFO encounter in the UK, often called Britain's Roswell. This incident differs significantly from the New Mexico event. Unlike Roswell's decades of secrecy, the Rendlesham encounter involved active duty officers recording their observations in real time. The forest itself has become a landmark. A walking trail now marks the alleged landing site, and local councils have installed commemorative plaques. The landscape remains largely unchanged, quiet, rural, pine-lined. Yet visitors with knowledge of the events often speak of an inexplicable stillness, particularly around the areas where ground impressions were once documented. Multiple U.S. Air Force personnel reported structured craft in the sky and on the ground over several nights. They measured unusual radiation levels and meticulously recorded their observations through audio sketches and physical data. No photos of the object have ever surfaced, though witnesses claim Air Force personnel were photographing the site. Many believe these images were either confiscated or classified. Official reactions were muted and incomplete, which only deepened the mystery. Radar and satellite data from the Bentwaters Control Tower remain sealed or have been destroyed. Numerous FOIA requests have failed to produce comprehensive logs from those nights. This wasn't a typical UFO report, not a fuzzy light or second-hand story, but a multi-day, multi-witness event involving military personnel on a nuclear-capable base. Decades of scrutiny have failed to provide a natural or man-made explanation that accounts for all the facts. The men who were present continue to discuss the incident. Some speak openly, others more reluctantly, but none have ever suggested it was a misunderstanding. For many, the Rendlesham incident didn't just challenge their imagination, it challenged their entire understanding of reality. Whatever occurred in those woods left lasting marks on the soil, on instruments, and on the soil piece, on the 16,000 on sets, and most profoundly on the minds of those who walked into the forest that night, expecting nothing more than another cold, quiet evening. 9. In June 1947, Harold Dahl was out on his patrol boat in Puget Sound with his son, a family dog, and 2 crewmen when 6 metallic discs suddenly appeared overhead, moving in a tight, slow formation. One disc faltered, tilting and dropping a spray of molten debris. Fragments hissed into the water, with some striking the boat. A piece burned Dahl's son, and another killed the dog. Dahl steered clear as the formation regrouped and slipped west into the haze. He kept a few shards from the deck, some light and brittle, others unnervingly heavy. Back on shore, Dahl shared the story only with a small circle, his boss Fred Chrisman and 2 close friends. He had no interest in making the incident public and hadn't even told his wife. The following morning, something felt different. An unexpected phone call came to his home from an unfamiliar voice. Polite but leaving no room for refusal, the caller suggested a breakfast meeting at a Tacoma diner, naming the place and time before Dahl could respond. At the diner, the man was already seated in a back booth, wearing a black suit, crisp white shirt, and narrow black tie. His hat rested neatly beside him. As Dahl slid into the opposite seat, the man didn't offer a name or shake hands. He simply fixed Dahl with an unwavering, steady gaze and began speaking. "You had quite an experience out there on the water," he said in a low, deliberate voice. Then, with remarkable precision, he described every detail: the number of craft, the wobbling disc, the spray of debris, the injury to Dahl's son, the dog's death. Dahl sat in silence, wondering how this stranger could know such specific information. At one point, the man leaned in slightly, suggesting it would be better for Dahl and his family to forget what they'd seen. There was no overt threat, no visible anger, but a weight behind the words suggested the outcome was already determined. Dahl noticed the man's pale face and sharp yet oddly flat features, as if he were accustomed to minimizing expression. His speech seemed measured, almost rehearsed. The conversation lasted barely 15 minutes. When it ended, the man stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without paying for his coffee. Through the diner's front window, Dahl watched him step into a black sedan parked at the curb. The car merged into the light morning traffic and disappeared. The meeting left an indelible mark on Dahl that he couldn't shake. The man hadn't tried to persuade him, but simply delivered an instruction, ensuring Dahl understood. That night, sleep eluded Dahl as he repeatedly recalled the moment the man described his son's injury. What struck him wasn't just the information, but the casual manner in which it was shared, as if such knowledge were utterly unremarkable. In the aftermath, Dahl steered clear of discussing the sighting. When a local reporter inquired about rumors of strange discs over the sound, Dahl dismissed them as a misunderstanding. Within a week, he publicly withdrew his entire account. Yet the story had already spread beyond his control. Chrisman, still believing something extraordinary had occurred, wrote to an Army Air Force contact, offering to show the debris. This led to two intelligence officers, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, flying from Hamilton Field in California to interview both men. The officers conducted extensive interviews, seeking precise details about times, positions, and object descriptions. They carefully examined the boat's damage and collected debris samples, noting in their records the unusual slag-like texture of some materials. They also documented inconsistencies in Doll's account, variations in event sequences, and uncertainty about exact distances. They couldn't determine whether these discrepancies stemmed from genuine confusion or Doll's reluctance to speak openly. After completing their interviews, Davidson and Brown boarded their B-25 bomber to return to California, carrying the debris samples. Tragically, somewhere near Kelso, Washington, the plane caught fire and crashed, killing both men. The debris was completely destroyed in the blaze. While news of the crash quickly spread through military channels, it was presented to the public as a simple accident. No mention was made of what the officers had been carrying. For Doll, this only strengthened his resolve to remain silent. He had been explicitly instructed to forget what he saw, and now 2 men were dead. Privately, he told a friend that the diner meeting felt less like a conversation and more like being briefed into a situation he wanted no part of. Eventually, the Air Force declared the Maury Island case a hoax, citing Doll's own retraction. But the timeline remained intriguing. A sighting, a mysterious visit, a reluctant witness, and an unexplained loss of physical evidence. The men in black became a recurring theme in UFO lore, emerging from a pattern of encounters that defied conventional explanation. Harold Dahl's experience on Maury Island marked the earliest known instance of this phenomenon. While the discs themselves were fleeting, the man who appeared afterward was impossible to ignore. In the years that followed, similar reports began to surface. Witnesses described unexpected visits from suited men who possessed an uncanny knowledge of events they couldn't have learned through normal channels. They would arrive without credentials, issue instructions without open threats, and leave behind more questions than answers. Albert Rosales, a Cuban-born researcher who immigrated to the United States, dedicated his life to documenting these encounters. Unlike other UFO investigators who focused on spacecraft or abduction stories, Rosales meticulously compiled testimonies of humanoid sightings from around the world. His extensive archives became a landmark collection of strange encounters. Within Rosales' vast catalogue, a consistent thread emerged. Witnesses who had experienced unusual phenomena would later report visits from men in dark suits. These visitors appeared alone or in groups, always with the same objective: to silence, confuse, and erase any trace of the original encounter. One of Rosales' earliest documented cases came from Puerto Rico in the mid-1960s, where a woman claimed to have seen a disc-shaped craft land near her neighborhood. The pattern was becoming clear, whether in fields, bedrooms, forests, or city streets. These mysterious figures would appear with total authority, knowing exactly what the witness had seen. These encounters transcended individual stories, forming a global pattern that transformed what might have been dismissed as folklore into a recurring phenomenon. The Men in Black became more than just a story. They were a consequence, a systematic response to unexplained sightings that continued to puzzle researchers for decades. No, she saw small figures briefly visible around her, which deeply unsettled her. She shared her experience with her husband and a close friend, seeking understanding and support. Within a week, 2 men in dark suits arrived at her door, presenting themselves as government agents investigating unusual aerial sightings. They began asking probing questions. Their inquiries were deeply unnerving. They wanted to know how much she remembered, whether she had spoken to anyone else, and if she had documented her experience in writing. When she admitted to having sketched the craft, one of the men demanded the drawing. Without hesitation, she handed it over. They left as abruptly as they had arrived, and she never saw them again. For years afterward, Rosales noted that she remained frightened, convinced her phone was being tapped, and that she had been somehow marked by the encounter. Another case in Rosales' files involved a Texas man in the 1970s. One night, he spotted a glowing oval craft hovering silently above a field. Intrigued, he stopped his truck and watched as it moved slowly toward the horizon. Days later, 2 men in black suits approached him at his workplace. Claiming to be investigators without producing any identification, they told him what had seen was a test vehicle and that discussing it further would be unwise. What disturbed the man most was their precise knowledge of his sighting, details he had never reported publicly. Years later, he confided in Rosales, still shaken by the encounter. Rosales' documentation extended to European cases. In a 1974 French report, a couple who had witnessed a hovering disc near their village was later visited by three men arriving in a black Citroën. Their questioning went beyond the sighting itself, delving into the couple's private lives, their work, income, and daily routines. When the couple grew suspicious and asked about their visitor's affiliation, they received only vague responses. "We represent the authorities," the men said before leaving abruptly. The couple described these visitors as eerily identical, wearing slightly outdated suits and moving in a robotic manner. What fascinated Rosales was how these men in black encounters seemed intrinsically linked to humanoid sightings. Many interviewees described not just strange aerial lights, but actual beings, short figures with glowing eyes, humanoids in luminous suits, or creatures defying description. Almost invariably, within days or weeks of such sightings, the men in dark suits would appear. It was as though the initial encounter triggered some form of containment protocol. Now, in the late 1960s, a family in Argentina experienced an encounter that would haunt them for years. After witnessing a luminous craft and small humanoids near their farm, they were visited by two men in black suits arriving in an immaculate vehicle. The men demanded to inspect the encounter site and issued a chilling warning: complete silence or face grave consequences. Terror gripped the family, and they obeyed without resistance. Decades later, they finally shared their story with Rosales in whispered tones, admitting they had never spoken of the incident before. These encounters, Rosales discovered, were not limited to remote rural areas. Urban settings also saw similar incidents. In 1980s London, a young man who observed a glowing sphere hovering over residential houses was soon visited by two men in black suits. Claiming to represent an unspecified institute, they interrogated him about the sighting's details, its light color and duration. When he requested identification, they merely smiled and dismissed his concerns. Upon their departure, he found his sketches of the sphere had vanished. Throughout his research, Rosales noted a striking pattern. These men in black were not random. They appeared with precise timing and unexpected knowledge, always following UFO sightings. Their impact was profound and psychological. Witnesses described feelings of inexplicable dread, as if their curiosity and enthusiasm were systematically drained. Rosales viewed this as evidence of a deliberate effort to gather and suppress information. His extensive files, spanning thousands of reports from diverse sources and languages, drew criticism from skeptics who argued the data was unreliable. Yet Rosales maintained that the overwhelming consistency across decades and cultures was itself compelling evidence. In his later writings, he explored various theories about the men in black, emphasizing their strategic approach to silencing witnesses and controlling narrative. The phenomenon transcended individual incidents, suggesting a coordinated, mysterious intervention. They were something strange, intelligence agents under a secret directive, extraterrestrials in crude human form, or beings capable of crossing dimensional boundaries. Their imperfection was most striking. Witnesses consistently described visitors who seemed almost human, but not quite. Their speech was stilted, movements awkward, appearances slightly off. It was as though they were attempting to mimic humanity without truly understanding it. Rosales never claimed definitive answers. As an archivist, his role was preserving stories for future generations. He gave shape to the Men in Black phenomenon, transforming it from scattered urban legends into a recurring global presence that shadowed UFO encounters. His collection remains a comprehensive resource for researchers exploring the deep-rooted Men in Black motif in UFO sighting histories. The greatest mystery for Rosales was not the UFOs themselves, but the silence that followed. Witnesses repeatedly told him that the lights in the sky were less frightening than the knock at the door afterward. The craft inspired awe, while the Men in Black inspired pure fear. These elements formed a pattern of revelation and suppression that has haunted UFO history for over half a century. As Rosales once remarked, "The lights may come and go, but the silence they leave behind is permanent, and the silence is enforced." In January 1958, far from populated areas, a Brazilian Navy training ship called the Almirante Salanaha was anchored off Trindade Island, a remote South Atlantic outpost. The vessel carried sailors, officers, and civilian scientists studying oceanography and geology. This routine expedition would become one of South America's most famous UFO cases. The island was an isolated volcanic place surrounded by churning waters and strong winds, offering only occasional military or scientific visits. On the morning of January 16th, as the crew prepared for departure, several witnesses noticed a bright object approaching from the sea, an event that would leave behind photographs still debated today. On Trended Island, a metallic disc-shaped craft emerged from a distant light, catching the attention of those aboard. Almiro Baruna, professional photographer documenting the mission, was among the witnesses. When someone shouted about an unusual object in the sky, he rushed to the deck, camera ready. The craft moved with remarkable silence, striking observers with its power and smooth movement. Sailors, officers, and civilians watched in a mix of awe and fear as the object maneuvered through the tropical sky, its movements captured by Baruna's lens. His photographs revealed a distinct disc with a raised dome tilted at angles suggesting deliberate navigation. Once developed, the images created immediate intrigue. The Brazilian Navy quickly took possession of the negatives and subjected them to careful examination. Experts confirmed no signs of tampering, which was unusual for UFO photographs of that era. What made these images particularly compelling was their origin. A respected professional photographer working in full view of dozens of witnesses, including military personnel. News spread rapidly, and within weeks, the photographs appeared in newspapers worldwide. Many considered them the clearest photographic evidence of unidentified flying objects to date. Brazil's government, typically reserved in such matters, confirmed the photograph's authenticity and detected no signs of hoax. The incident occurred during a period of frequent UFO reports and high public fascination in Brazil. Unlike the secrecy often practiced elsewhere, the military's approach was notable for its openness in confirming rather than denying the photographs. Skeptics remained divided. Some argued the images were too perfect, pointing to the classic saucer-like appearance. Others suggested Baruna might have faked the photographs, though no clear method of deception was ever demonstrated. Critics noted Baruna's pre-existing interest in UFOs, which raised questions of potential bias. However, the presence of naval officers and scientists who reported no trickery lent significant credibility to the account. The photographs continued to provoke debate, representing a remarkable moment in UFO documentation. Some saw this moment as a turning point when a national government first openly acknowledged the possibility of something unknown operating in its skies. The Trend Island photographs quickly became staples in UFO literature, appearing in books, documentaries, and exhibitions. Often described as some of the clearest images of a disc-shaped craft, these photographs resisted easy dismissal. Witnesses were numerous, and official examinations failed to uncover fraud. For Baruna, the photographs brought a complex mix of fame and frustration. He was repeatedly questioned about his methods, but never wavered from his original account. Until his death, he maintained that what he captured was exactly what it appeared to be, a structured, solid object flying over Trend Island in January 1958. The case continues to spark debate today. Some view the photographs as undeniable proof of extraordinary craft visiting Earth in the mid-20th century. Others see them as tantalizing yet inconclusive, a mystery captured on film but never fully explained. Their impact, however, remains undeniable. In an era before digital manipulation, these images were taken during a military expedition in a controlled setting. Photographs that continue to challenge assumptions about what might be flying in our skies. The Trendard Island images endure because they sit at the intersection of credibility and controversy. Taken in front of many witnesses and handled through official channels, they were never proven fraudulent. They remain frozen moments in time, a disc-shaped craft banking through bright air above a lonely South Atlantic island, its purpose unknown, its origin unexplained. For Brazil, it became a national story. For the world, one of the most iconic visual records in UFO history, these photographs represent more than just an unexplained phenomenon. They symbolize a moment when the boundaries of known reality were challenged, when photographic evidence suggested something beyond conventional understanding might exist in our skies. And radar operators at Selfridge first detected something unusual. Just after 9 p.m., the identified large target approached from the northeast, initially seeming like routine Ontario flight traffic. However, its speed and trajectory quickly revealed it was anything but ordinary. The The blip's behavior defied explanation. It moved steadily across the radar scope, then abruptly slowed and hovered in place. Ground observers confirmed what controllers were seeing, a strange light in the sky. Security police, patrolling the flight line, spotted a bright, glowing object suspended silently above the base perimeter. Witnesses described the object as round with a faint halo, larger than a star but smaller than a full moon. Unlike typical navigation lights, this one remained steady, luminous, and eerily silent. The order came quickly. Scramble and interceptor. An F-94 Starfire jet roared into the night, its afterburner cutting through frozen air. Lieutenant John Williams and his radar observer climbed rapidly, guided by ground control toward the unknown target. As they approached, both men witnessed a structured disc-like object hovering thousands of feet above the base, radiating a constant white light. The pursuit became a remarkable dance. Each time Williams adjusted course, the object responded by smoothly moving away, seemingly aware of the interceptor's movements. Radar tracking confirmed the strange maneuvers. The object accelerated suddenly, stopped, then darted off in ways no known aircraft could replicate. Despite pushing the F-94 engines to maximum, the unknown craft consistently outpaced them. The crew reported brief instrument flickering, though not severe enough to abort the chase. Williams later described the encounter as feeling like the object was playfully toying with them. Never threatening, but always one step ahead. After nearly 20 minutes, the object shot upward at incredible speed, vanishing from both radar and visual sight in mere seconds. Back at Selfridge, detailed reports were compiled. Radar operators, ground observers, and the interceptor crew all provided consistent accounts. A glowing disc-shaped object demonstrating responsive movement and performance far beyond contemporary aircraft capabilities. Now, when Blue Book investigators reviewed the case, they quickly recognized its strength. Multiple data sources corroborated the event. Ground radar, interceptor radar, ground witnesses, and aircrew logged it in real time. This was not a single person's story, but a coordinated incident at a major Air Force base. Detroit in 1953 was the heart of America's defense industry, producing tanks, aircraft, and engines for the Cold War. Selfridge Air Force Base protected this industrial corridor. An unknown intruder hovering above raised troubling questions. Was it a Soviet reconnaissance craft, or something even stranger? Yet, as in so many cases, official explanations were unsatisfying. Analysts suggested temperature inversions could have caused false radar returns, and that pilots might have mistaken a bright star or plane for a moving object. But these ideas collapsed under scrutiny. Temperature inversions do not produce luminous objects tracked by multiple radars. Stars do not evade jet interceptors or vanish upward at incredible speed. Civilian researchers later highlighted the Selfridge incident as one of the stronger radar visual incidents in Blue Book's archive. NICAP pointed out its parallels with other base intrusions, radar confirmation, luminous objects, intelligent maneuvers, and jets outpaced. The incident fits into a broader pattern seen at bases like Wartsmith, Minot, and Ellsworth, strategic installations attracting unexplained aerial visitors. For skeptics, explanations range from balloons to misidentifications of civilian aircraft, but none accounted for the radar data, sudden accelerations or vertical departure. Balloons drift with wind. They do not hover and then streak upward. Civilian planes produce predictable radar signatures. They do not dance across scopes with erratic bursts of speed. Privately, the case was labeled unidentified. Publicly, it was downplayed, filed away among thousands of other Blue Book entries. For the men involved, this was frustrating. They knew what they had seen and tracked. It was real, solid, and extraordinary. For those who experienced it, the memory lingered. Radar operators recalled the solid blip that defied expectations. Ground observers remembered the silent glow hanging above the base. And the F-94 crew, professionals trained to intercept, knew something remarkable had occurred. No, Soviet bombers were left humbled by an object that could not be caught. The Selfridge Air Force Base intruder embodies a classic UFO case that captures the essence of Project Blue Book. With all the hallmarks of a credible encounter, professional witnesses, radar tracking, visual confirmation, and an attempted interception, it carried profound symbolic weight. This incident unfolded over one of America's most critical industrial and military centers during the height of the Cold War. investigators found themselves caught between professional observation and public reassurance. Strong evidence was clear, multiple witnesses, radar confirmation, and a military context. Yet the result was a file quietly, stamped unidentified, never receiving the attention it truly warranted. For the men who served that night, this was no illusion. They experienced a real encounter with something inexplicable, a silent intruder that defied pursuit, leaving only questions in its wake. It remains one of the enduring mysteries in the Blue Book files. Was this luminous visitor a trick of radar and imagination, or a glimpse of something far more extraordinary? Far from urban centers, in the quiet rivers of Minas, another extraordinary story unfolded. On May 3, 1962, in Bidoro, a fisherman named Jose Antonio Silva set out before dawn, carrying only his nets and the patience of routine. He expected nothing more than the day's catch. Instead, Silva returned with a story he wished he had never told, an account of being taken aboard a craft not of this earth. His familiar journey was suddenly disrupted when a glow rose above the tree line, faint at first, then gathering intensity. What he initially thought might be sunrise catching fog was actually something else entirely. The light moved deliberately, descending toward him until it hovered directly over the river. For Silva, the encounter was just the beginning. The true burden came later, when strangers arrived to remind him that silence was safer than truth. Most men would have been overwhelmed by such a memory, but for Silva, the weight of his experience extended far beyond the moment itself, a testament to an encounter that defied explanation. Not a metallic, seamless craft with a dome hung silently above Dilva's boat. No engine sounds broke the stillness, just a brilliant humming. A light beam cascaded downward, completely engulfing his vessel. His body lifted, paralyzed, and weightless. Later, Dilva would recall fragmented impressions, strange figures resembling humans but moving differently. Cold sensations, unfamiliar instruments, and panels surrounded him. These beings seemed to observe him, communicating in unrecognizable sounds. When he regained consciousness, his boat rocked gently. The sun was high, his nets untouched, and hours had vanished without explanation. This bewildering experience would have been haunting enough on its own, but for Dilva, the abduction was just the beginning. Returning home, he was visibly shaken. His family immediately noticed his disheveled appearance and distant gaze. Initially, he shared only fragments of his experience with them, but in a small community, such stories spread quickly. Neighbors whispered about strange lights in the area, and journalists soon arrived, eager for details. Dilva resisted at first, feeling embarrassed and reluctant. Yet eventually, he spoke. His hesitant but consistent account appeared in print. A fisherman taken aboard a strange craft, examined by non-earthly beings, and returned with lost time. Researchers saw it as an extraordinary claim, part of a growing collection of abduction reports from South America. For Dilva, the publicity felt like painful exposure. Each retelling left him uneasy, as if speaking about the experience might invoke unknown consequences. Weeks after the story broke, those consequences materialized. One evening, walking home along a dusty road, he encountered two men whose presence seemed entirely out of place. They were tall, dressed in immaculate dark suits with crisp white shirts and narrow ties. Their shoes gleamed as if just stepped from a city street, incongruous against the rural landscape. When they spoke, their Portuguese was correct but unnaturally stiff. "You must stop speaking of what you saw," one of them said. Dilva froze. Their manner was inhumanly precise. Pale faces, unblinking eyes. He would later describe their features as foreign, more like masks imitating human form than actual people. The men arrived without explanation, their faces belonging to them. No credentials were offered, no identification provided. They simply delivered their instructions with stark clarity. Do not talk to reporters. Do not give interviews. Do not repeat the story, Dilva stammered, insisting what had happened was true. The men responded by stepping closer, their movements perfectly synchronized. One leaned forward inches from Dilva's face, repeating the command in the same flat tone. No threats of violence were spoken, yet Dilva felt threatened. The precision of their speech, the blankness of their gaze, the way their presence seemed to drain the night of ordinary sound, it was enough. When finished, the men turned and walked away, their footsteps oddly muffled against the dirt. They did not look back, their black suits disappearing into the twilight. The encounter was brief, mere minutes, but its weight was enormous. That night, Dilver told his family what transpired. His wife remembered his trembling, the way his voice broke while repeating their words. His children recalled how he barred the door, pacing the small home long into the night, glancing at windows as though expecting the men to return. From that day forward, everything changed. Neighbors first noticed the absence of his laughter at gatherings, how he no longer lingered in the marketplace. He became withdrawn, avoiding conversation and declining invitations. Where once he was sociable, he was now distant. He confided to relatives that he felt watched. Sometimes, he said, cars were parked at the edge of town, unfamiliar and out of place. Sometimes men would loiter in silence before disappearing without a word. The fisherman who had once told his story openly now avoided even mentioning the river. His children remembered his constant vigilance, checking windows, scanning the road before stepping outside. Even at home, he seemed restless, pacing rooms at night. For Da Silva, the initial abduction had been terrifying but fleeting. The visit, however, was enduring. It had entered his daily life, reshaping his routines and eroding his peace. He stopped fishing as frequently, preferring to remain close to home. Night travel was declining. In conversation, he grew guarded, measuring each word. His once steady demeanor gave way to nervous silences. The story of Jose Antonio Dilva represents a critical moment in UFO research beyond the United States. His encounter revealed a pattern of intimidation that would later echo through Brazilian communities. For years, locals had spoken in hushed tones about strange lights and mysterious men who seemed intent on suppressing any discussion of unusual events. Local parents warned children against mentioning these incidents. Neighbors would lower their voices when the topic arose. Dilver himself became a symbol of silent resistance, retreating into a private life marked by caution and restraint. His experience wasn't just a personal story, but a broader reflection of how UFO encounters were managed. Years later, the Brazilian Air Force would conduct Operation Plate, one of the most extensive UFO investigations in history. In the Amazonian town of Caris, entire communities reported extraordinary events, beams of light descending from strange craft, causing burns, illness, and even deaths. The military documented photographs, radar readings, and hundreds of testimonies, many of which remained classified until the 1990s. Dilver's initial encounter and subsequent silence became a template for future incidents. The men who had taken his trust continued their work of suppression. Researchers who attempted to follow up were consistently turned away. His story, initially spread through newspaper accounts, remained fragmentary. The phenomenon wasn't confined to a single location. The same pale visitors in dark suits seen in Santa Ana and Maine were walking dirt roads in Brazil. Witnesses across different regions reported similar experiences of intimidation and suppression. For Dilver, the legacy was deeply personal. He was remembered not for what he claimed to have seen, but for the pervasive fear that seemed to follow him. His retreat into quiet life mirrored the experiences of other witnesses who were warned against speaking out. Today, the rivers of Minas Gerais flow past a landscape of unspoken stories, where silence itself became a form of testimony. Runners always have, carrying fishermen's nets and the weight of forgotten stories. On Colares Island in Paracas State, Brazil, life typically moved with the tide. But by late 1977, something had disrupted the calm. Strange lights had been crossing the sky for weeks, hovering low over houses and casting narrow beams that seemed to drain energy from those they touched. Locals called this phenomenon chupa, sucker. The Brazilian Air Force had quietly stationed an intelligence service detachment nearby, officially monitoring atmospheric phenomena. Their mission, Operation Saucer, remained shrouded in secrecy. Uniformed men with cameras, notebooks, and field equipment watched from the edges of town, keeping to themselves. Few remember the morning Jose Antonio Dilva returned home shaken, claiming he had been lifted into a craft beyond his world. Fewer still recall the strangers who arrived afterward, their command sharper than any memory of light in the sky. For Dilva, the abduction was extraordinary, but it was the visit that endured. The craft had come and gone. The men had stayed, their presence lingering in every cautious glance, in every silence that followed a question. That evening, the air was thick and humid, electricity flickering as it sometimes did in Colares. Locals were already uneasy. Lights had been appearing more frequently, and some residents no longer ventured far from home after sunset. Fisherman Antonio D. Costa sat on a low stool outside his house, repairing a net by the light of a kerosene lamp. A few streets away, shopkeeper Maria Lucia Rivero locked up her store and lingered at the doorway, scanning the horizon over the water. It began just after dark. A bright, solid light appeared from the northeast, moving steadily over the river toward the island. At first, it could be mistaken for an aircraft, but its approach was silent. The light grew larger, slowing until it hovered just above the shoreline. And perhaps that was always the point, not to erase the memory of what happened on the river, but to ensure it remained buried in silence. The Colares Flap, single night account, November 1977. Meters wide, a pale amber glow betrayed a disc-like shape behind the light. Two smaller lights broke away from the main object, drifting in different directions. Their movement defied explanation. They shifted height and direction with an impossible precision, ruling out fishing boats or helicopters. The main craft hovered near the shore, perfectly still. Narrow beams began to emerge from the object, almost solid in appearance. They moved with calculated intent. Radios burst into static when a beam passed over a house. Another beam swept low across a street, causing nearby buildings to flicker and dim. On the beach, Antonio stood to get a better view. The beam turned toward him, pressing a hot, focused heat against his chest like a burning coin. His hands went limp, the net falling to the ground. He sat down, not from panic, but from a sudden, overwhelming weakness. Later, he would find a small, circular mark where the beam had touched him. From her veranda, Maria watched. A smaller light glided between two palm trees, its glow just bright enough to reveal a dome-like curve. The beam moved over a chicken coop, causing the birds to erupt in noise before falling silent, as if muted by something beyond fear. The phenomenon spread across the island. Shouts rang out as people called to neighbors. Some ran inside, pulling curtains tight. Others stood frozen at gates and doorways, transfixed by the spectacle. Independent lights maneuvered between houses before rejoining the main craft over the beach. The Air Force team stationed nearby observed through long-lens cameras and binoculars. They documented beam activity and object movement without interference, following strict orders to observe only. Their radios crackled with static each time a beam passed close, forcing communication through hand signals. The island's electricity became increasingly unstable. Houses lost power in intermittent bursts. The craft's glow now outshone every other light. Beams moved deliberately, tracing precise lines as if conducting a meticulous search. At least 2 people were directly affected. Antonio experienced a chest burn and deep fatigue that kept him from working the next day. Another man returning from the docks reported intense heat on his neck. That night, several victims sought help at the local municipal clinic. Dr. Dyer, well-eyed Satum Carvalho meticulously examined their unusual marks. The wounds were small, round burns with clean edges, sometimes paired with nearby pinprick wounds. She observed that healthy adults were experiencing strange symptoms like headaches, dizziness, and anemia-like conditions. The skin around these marks was tender but not blistered, and the wounds healed without infection. She carefully documented each case, avoiding speculation about their origin. By the next morning, Air Force personnel had quietly returned to the beach. Using metal cases and simple tools, they collected soil and water samples from the area where the object had hovered. They spoke to no one about their activities and had departed by midday. Weeks later, residents discovered that the lights had been tracked on radar at BAM Air Base, moving at speeds and altitudes inconsistent with conventional aircraft. The data, along with photographs reportedly showing the hovering craft and its beams, was filed away. When portions of the operational files were declassified in 2004, sketches of the craft appeared alongside witness testimonies from that specific night. Descriptions emerged of a large disk accompanied by smaller lights, of beams causing heat and weakness, and of electrical interference in homes and radios. The official language remained neutral, describing only unidentified aerial phenomena with reported physiological effects. For the islanders, such lack of answers was familiar. The Chupa Chupa wave had been building for weeks and would continue afterward with regional sightings. This particular evening stood out vividly because of its widespread witness accounts, the object's proximity, and its direct impact on people. The Air Force's decision to document but not intervene raised its own set of questions. Why were the beams so precise in targeting individuals? What determined who was struck and who was passed over? Those affected described a metallic taste in their mouth. Both noted the sensation was unlike any injury they had felt before. No lasting pain existed, but a heavy weakness lingered. After about 20 minutes, the craft shifted position, tilting slightly before rising higher. The smaller lights rejoined it, and together they moved toward open water. With no acceleration or sound, they departed smoothly until lost against the darkness beyond the river's mouth. The Klamath River imprint unfolded over 2 nights in July 1980 deep in Northern California's forest. Kevin Madsen, a 34-year-old former biology teacher working as a fire watch, occupied the Marble Peak Lookout Tower at 6,200 feet. From his vantage point, he had a clear view of the Clear Creek Campground, a quiet forest area near the river's edge. That summer had been exceptionally dry, with high wildfire risks prompting the U.S. Forest Service to station seasonal lookout officers at remote towers along the ridgelines. On Friday, July 18th, just after sunset, something began to change in the environment. Campers would later describe an eerie stillness descending. The forest sounds disappeared. Cicadas fell silent, birds stopped chirping, and even the rustling of raccoons ceased. Dogs refused to leave their tents, and one child noticed her flashlight inexplicably dimming despite new batteries. From his tower, Madsen first spotted a strange shimmer on the eastern ridge above the river. Initially mistaking it for moonlight, he raised his binoculars and realized something else entirely was occurring. A slow-moving amber light drifted just above the treetops, hovering in a fixed pattern before abruptly shifting direction. At 10:14 p.m., Madsen logged his observation of a visual aerial light. The incident would become part of a larger narrative, one that left more questions. Carvalho meticulously documented the event, creating notes that would later interest researchers studying close aerial encounters. No physical marker commemorates this night, no beach plaque or town square monument. The only records exist in Air Force files, medical clinic notes, and the stories of those who witnessed the beams finding their targets. For Antonio, a mark on his chest faded after several days, but the memory of sudden weakness remained. Maria spoke of the sight only when directly asked, preferring to recall the quietude before the glow appeared. The night folded itself into the broader tapestry of local history. A season when lights came low, beams touched the ground, and a small community was left to adapt without comprehending what they had experienced. The memory of a hovering disk flanked by smaller lights belongs to those who watched it move over the shore and felt its attention fall upon them. The official record remains brief. Questions persist unanswered. A mysterious object moved silently, without engine noise, its origin unknown. The encounter unfolded at Clear Creek, where 3 campers witnessed something extraordinary. From their perspective, the object was disc-shaped, roughly 30 feet across, with a domed top and a pulsing light underneath. Strangely, it made no sound. The campers experienced a peculiar pressure in their chest, similar to standing near a heavy engine or electrical transformer, but without any vibration or heat on their skin. They noted the air felt thick, reminiscent of pre-lightning conditions, but different. Their battery lanterns flickered oddly. Even when switched off, an amber-red glow cast long shadows over the trees. Yet nothing on the ground was directly illuminated. The craft hovered motionlessly for approximately 2-3 minutes before rising slowly, tilting slightly, and then shooting straight up into the night sky. Within seconds, it vanished completely. From his tower, Madsen observed only the vertical departure, describing it as a dropout as if the object simply blinked out at high speed. No trail or after image remained, just darkness where the glow had been. By dawn, the Forest Service office in Eureka was informed. Ranger Susan Alliston and her junior partner Tom Valencia, accompanied by Madsen, arrived at the site just after 7 a.m. on July 19th. The campers guided them to the clearing where the object had hovered. Their findings were difficult to ignore. A circular scorch mark, about 20 feet in diameter, dominated the center of the clearing. The grass within the ring appeared browned and flattened, not entirely burned but clearly heat damaged. A patch of glassy residue sat in the middle, melted soil fused into a shallow lens shape. Faint traces of ozone and burnt vegetation lingered in the air. Al Alston meticulously documented the scene, taking Polaroid photographs, sketching details in her notebook, and collecting 2 soil samples from the outer and inner rings. Tree bark around the perimeter showed heat exposure, with blackened, curling patches around waist height on 2 pine trees. Wildlife tracks, raccoon and deer, were visible leading toward the clearing, but none entered the central zone. The tracks simply turned and veered away. That evening, Alston filed an internal memo to her district supervisor, noting the unusual heat damage and lack of an apparent ignition source. And the curious incident from July 19, 1980, known as the Clear Creek Anomaly, began with Kevin Madson's field observations and Alston's memo. Forest Service officials interviewed unnamed campers, warning them against discussing the event with press or locals. According to a summary by a retired ranger, they were told the incident was a localized atmospheric reflection, a claim unsupported by NOAA or FAA records. The physical evidence was sparse: soil sample analysis, photographs, and field sketches. No burn indicators, campfires, or flammable materials were found in the area. While no formal report was filed with NORAD and no military aircraft were noted, the incident remained a quiet topic among Forest Service personnel. In 1987, a researcher from Northern Anomalies Quarterly uncovered details through an interview with a Tail, retired Forest Service technician. They obtained a partial scan of Alston's field sketch and memo summary, the first public reference to what would become known as the Klamath River imprint. Madsen, who worked 2 more Firewatch seasons before returning to Humboldt County, remained resolute. In a 1991 letter, he stated unequivocally, "I know what I saw. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't military, and it wasn't an illusion. I can still see the way it moved like it wasn't affected by gravity." Rangers who worked the district in the 1980s spoke about the mysterious burn ring at Clear Creek, though few had witnessed it firsthand. The archive documenting the incident, housed in a small ranger station west of Eureka, was destroyed in a fire 3 years after the event. Only a single reference survived in a secondary personnel file. Alston's perspective was telling. When asked why the case was never shared with federal agencies, she simply said, "We weren't told to report it, we were told not to speculate." That was the difference. Though physical evidence has since vanished, lost to time and fire, the memory persists among those who were present. The clearing itself eventually transformed, overtaken by wild grass and young saplings, nature slowly obscuring the site of an unexplained encounter. No Kofu City, nestled in Yamanashi Prefecture, Japan, was known for its tranquil mountain landscapes and family vineyards in the mid-1970s. A provincial capital sitting in a basin between the Japanese Alps, the city's streets followed the gentle rhythms of seasonal life. On a cold February evening, specifically Sunday, February 23, 1975, 2 7-year-old boys, Masato Kawano and Katsuhiro Yamaha, were walking home through Kamimachi, a neighborhood bordering the vineyards. They had spent the afternoon visiting a friend, and as darkness fell around 6 p.m., their familiar shortcut wound between dormant skeletal vines stretching across pale soil. The winter night was silent, interrupted only by distant train hums and wind rustling through the landscape. Mountains cast long shadows, and faint moonlight mingled with scattered window glows. Years later, some former rangers spoke of unusual aftermath at the site. They claimed vegetation in the center grew slower, never fully recovering its original texture or density compared to surrounding forest areas. No academic or military study followed the incident. No seismic activity was recorded that night. The imprint remained unexplained, yet the story persisted. It became a whispered reminder in training sessions, not officially, but as a subtle caution. Rangers are trained to observe and record, not speculate, but questions lingered. Why would an object hover silently, emit focused heat, and vanish without sound or trace? What caused the chest pressure, electrical flickering, and unusual animal avoidance patterns? Why was no outside agency brought in even to dismiss the claims? For those studying ground trace phenomena, the Klamath River case sits in a rare category. There was no hysteria, no press, just a clear night, a few silent witnesses, and a patch of earth changed by something nameless. Over time, it became one of those quiet files that disappear from public records but persist in memory, handed down through footnotes and anecdotes, retold around ranger stations, referenced only as the imprint case. No conclusion was ever reached, but the wilderness doesn't forget. That night, something extraordinary happened on an otherwise ordinary path in Japan. Two boys walking through the landscape experienced one of the country's strangest encounters. High above the horizon, two orange lights caught their attention. At first, they thought the lights might be helicopters from a nearby airfield or perhaps lanterns drifting in the evening air, but these weren't typical lights. They remained unnaturally still and steady with no flickering or movement. No engine sounds broke the silence of the valley. The glow pulsed gently, almost like a living heartbeat. As the boys watched, the lights began moving closer together, eventually merging into a single, brighter illumination. To their amazement, the light didn't remain suspended in the sky. Instead, it started descending directly toward the vineyards ahead. Torn between fear and fascination, the boys didn't run. Their small feet crunched on the dirt path as they moved forward. As they approached the clearing, the glow took shape. A domed craft roughly 5 meters across and bowl-shaped rested among the vines. Warm orange light seemed to emanate from within, spilling through seams and edges of its smooth surface. The metal gleamed softly, reflecting both its internal glow and moonlight. Vineyard trellis wires shimmered orange, casting twisted shadows on the ground. A deep, earth-like humming vibration filled the air. Masato and Katsuhiro felt the sound in their chests, their heartbeats synchronizing with its rhythm. Suddenly, a line appeared in the craft's side, mechanically sliding open to reveal a hatch. A figure emerged, stepping down deliberately. Small, about 120 centimeters tall, it was nearly the same height as the children. Its body was humanoid, but with strange proportions. An oversized head sat atop a disproportionate frame. Its face looked like weathered bronze, with sharply pointed ears jutting out against the surrounding glow. The most terrifying detail was its hands. Near the vineyard's edge that night, something extraordinary unfolded. Two children, Masato and Katsuhiro, stood frozen as a strange craft emitted an orange glow. Inside the metallic vessel, claws gleamed under the eerie light. A being emerged, walking with heavy, deliberate steps that seemed to carry immense weight. The creature approached, its large, wrinkled head tilting slightly as it studied the children. Suddenly, it reached out and placed a clawed hand on Masato's shoulder. An instant of pure terror followed. Masato felt his body lock in place, unable to move, unable to run, yet fully aware of his helplessness. Katsuhiro's panicked shout shattered the silence, breaking the strange paralysis. Masato stumbled back, gasping. Without hesitation, both boys bolted through the vineyard, their feet kicking up soil, lungs burning with each desperate breath. Behind them, the craft's orange glow pulsed, casting strange shadows among the vines. By the time they reached the neighborhood's edge, tears blurred their vision. They shouted over each other, desperate to be heard. What they had witnessed was beyond comprehension. A craft landing, a being emerging, a clawed hand reaching out. They weren't alone in noticing something unusual. Neighbors had seen the strange light too. One woman described it as though the field was burning but without flames. Another man noted the orange light was too steady to be mistaken for anything ordinary. People stood on their balconies, staring in unease, unsure what to believe. When the boys burst into their homes, they were a mix of tears and frantic words. Their parents struggled to understand, asking if they'd been chased by dogs or attacked by bullies. But the boys knew what they had seen was something entirely different, something that would haunt them long after that night. Nowhere emerged was a story so fantastic it could have been a child's hallucination. Two boys, breathing hard, described a scene that seemed impossible. A glowing ship, a hatch opening, beings with metallic wrinkled faces and sharp claws. When questioned separately, their accounts were remarkably consistent. Each detailed the same glowing dome in the vineyard, the same grotesque creature with a clawed hand, the same moment when Masato was frozen by its touch. Their fathers, initially skeptical but growing worried, asked the children to draw what they had witnessed. Pencils trembling, the boys created sketches that were surprisingly precise. A domed craft, bathed in orange light. A figure with pointed ears and a wrinkled face, hands ending in curved claws. What unsettled the parents most was how closely the two drawings matched. Neighbors began to gather, intrigued by the boys' panicked return. Several admitted seeing a strange glow over the vineyard. One woman described a fireball floating low among the vines. Another man claimed the orange light reflected off the metal trellises, making the entire vineyard seem to glow. Masato's father decided to investigate. Flashlight in hand, he walked toward the vineyard. The glow had faded, but he caught a final glimpse. A faint orange sphere rising slowly, drifting higher until it vanished into the night sky. He returned, pale, confirming something unusual had occurred. The story spread quickly. Local police were called to the scene. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing odd impressions in the soil at the spot the boys described. The marks were shallow but symmetrical, as if heavy objects had briefly pressed into the earth. Nearby grass appeared singed, its edges browned and brittle. On February 25, 1975, the Yamanashi Nittanichi Shimbun newspaper published an article about the mysterious landing. The piece detailed the testimony of Masato and Katsuhiro, included accounts from neighboring witnesses, and featured the curious physical evidence found in the vineyard. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors after two boys, Masato and Katsuhiro, drew unsettling sketches depicting a strange craft and bizarre beings. Their crude drawings showed clawed hands, pointed ears, and metallic wrinkles that didn't match typical children's fantasies. School became a complicated landscape for the boys. Some classmates mocked them as dreamers, while others kept their distance, sensing something unsettling about their experience. The boys themselves grew quiet, overwhelmed by the attention and their own terror. Parents grappled with an inexplicable situation. The precise, grotesque details their children described couldn't be dismissed as imagination. Soil disturbances, multiple witness accounts of a glowing orange light, and consistent descriptions made the story difficult to ignore. Neighborhood speculation ran wild. Families began warning children to despite theories about pranks, no one could explain the physical evidence. The police investigation was brief and inconclusive, noting only soil disturbances and inconsistent witness statements. The boys were profoundly affected. Masato reported recurring nightmares of a wrinkled face, while Katsuhiro became reluctant to walk alone at night. They avoided the vineyards for months, their once familiar path now shadowed by an unexplained encounter. The sketches themselves became a haunting artifact. Unlike Hollywood's smooth, friendly alien depictions, these drawings carried a raw, terrified honesty. They captured something different, something that lingered in the public imagination, challenging understanding and defying easy explanation. The encounter in the vineyard lingered like an unresolved mystery, whispered between neighbors and spoken of cautiously by parents who couldn't fully dismiss the boys' account. More than a simple story, this was an experience that touched the boundary between the known and unknown. Something had descended briefly into an ordinary landscape, leaving impressions in the soil and touching a child's shoulder before vanishing into the sky. For Masato and Katsuhiro, this wasn't just a childhood incident, it became a defining memory that never lost its sharp edge of fear. When they spoke about it years later, their details remained remarkably consistent. The glowing dome, the clawed hands, the wrinkled metallic face, and the paralyzing moment of contact. They understood how easily serious accounts could be turned into mockery, yet they never wavered. Whenever challenged, they insisted the grotesque beings were real, not dreams, not folklore, not imagination. The terror of running through the vineyard was too vivid, too immediate to be dismissed. Researchers found this consistency remarkable. Children's memories typically shift and blur over time, conforming to expectations or fading, but Masato and Katsuhiro's accounts remained unchanged, their drawings identical, their words echoing the same sequence of events, as if the memory had been frozen, untouched by passing years. In the 1980s, Japanese UFO researchers revisited the case. They tracked down newspaper articles, interviewed surviving neighbors, and examined the boys' sketches. What fascinated them most was the unique description of these beings. Unlike the typical smooth-skinned, large-eyed figures of American encounters, these Kofu beings were distinctly grotesque. The Yamanashi newspaper report became a document saved and studied by researchers across Japan. The Kofu incident would be catalogued in UFO journals and discussed at conferences, transforming from a local mystery to a subject of broader scientific curiosity. Westall and Katsuhiro's encounter defied the typical alien narratives found in movies and books. Their descriptions of the beings were far from the standard science fiction portrayal. Instead, they were wrinkled, clawed, and almost monstrous, with features that unsettled researchers. Why would children invent such disturbing details? If media had influenced them, one might expect more conventional descriptions of flying saucers and humanoid figures, yet their drawings suggested something truly alien, beyond imagination. A Japanese investigator noted the unsettling nature of their account, remarking that if this was fantasy, it was not one a child would typically create. The physical experience was equally extraordinary. Masato described a paralyzing sensation that mirrored other global encounter reports, a beam of light or touch that rendered witnesses immobile. His description was raw and childlike, unable to move, unable to breathe, trapped within his own body until his friend's scream broke the spell. Some sought cultural explanations. Japan's rich folklore includes supernatural beings like Tengu, creatures with strange faces and otherworldly powers, and oni demons with grotesque features. Could the boys have unconsciously drawn from these traditional stories? Perhaps. But Masato and Katsuhiro were adamant. This was no myth. They described a specific scene, a glowing craft with a hatch, beings emerging from metal, not mist. They had witnessed this landing in a vineyard, not on a storybook page. For them, there was no blurring between folklore and their lived experience. The case carved a modest place in Japan's UFO history. It stood out as one of the few encounters involving both a landed craft and visible beings. Researchers catalogued it alongside other 1970s sightings, glowing discs over Fukushima farmland, luminous objects skimming waves near Shimane, radar-tracked intruders in Hokkaido, yet none matched the visceral impact of the Kofu incident. For the families in Kamamachi, it became a whispered story. Children were warned to avoid the vineyards after dark. The land itself seemed transformed. Years later, locals still spoke of the orange glow and the boys' palpable terror, a testament to an encounter that defied conventional understanding. No official response came. No national agencies investigated, no samples were released, and no broader inquiry was undertaken. The government remained silent, as if the event had never occurred. Only a few fragments survived: a newspaper clipping, the boys' sketches, and the memories of those who stood on balconies that February night, witnessing the mysterious glow. The encounter left an indelible mark on Masato and Katsuhiro. Decades later, interviews revealed they could still vividly describe the beings. Wrinkled skin, clawed hands, a face illuminated by an orange light. Even as an adult, Masato sometimes felt a phantom sensation of claws on his shoulder, a memory that resurged when he thought too deeply about that night. Japanese researchers pondered the peculiarity of the case. In a country with few UFO reports compared to the United States or Europe, why would this encounter feature such grotesque beings? Was this evidence of authenticity, or an indication that what happened in Kofu was fundamentally different from Western flying saucer narratives? The vineyard has transformed over time. Houses now stand where fields once stretched. Roads have been paved. Yet for those who remember, the land remains marked by that inexplicable night. The memory survives not through monuments, but through whispered recollections, a faded newspaper clipping, and the sketches of two frightened boys attempting to capture something that should not exist. The Kofu City Vineyard Landing's enduring power lies in its stark simplicity. Two children walking home at dusk, a glowing sky descending into fields, a domed craft opening, a claw reaching out to touch a boy's shoulder. No messages, no explanations, no grand displays of power, just a grotesque presence and a fleeting, inexplicable contact. The incident unsettles precisely because it offers no resolution. The beings made no attempt to communicate. They did not chase, speak, or linger. They appeared, observed, touched, and departed, leaving behind a profound sense of intrusion that continues to disturb those who study it. For Masato and Katsuhiro, it was the night childhood innocence shattered. For everyone else, it remains a chilling reminder of the unknown. The unknown doesn't always reveal itself in remote deserts or military installations. Sometimes it quietly emerges on a neighborhood path where children walk home at dusk, leaving behind only a sketch, a newspaper clipping, and the haunting memory of a clawed hand in the darkness. The night of November 2nd, 1957, began like any other across the dusty plains of West Texas. Leland, a town 30 miles west of Lac, lay quiet beneath a dark autumn sky. Farmers had already retired for the evening, and the roads cutting through cotton fields stood nearly empty. But within just a few hours, something extraordinary would unfold. Motorists across a wide stretch of countryside encountered luminous egg-shaped objects descending close to the ground, resulting in stalled cars and shaken witnesses. By night's end, at least a dozen separate reports had been filed from truck drivers, students, and working men traveling the long Texas roads. Each encounter shared a peculiar pattern. A glowing craft hovering low, with an almost immediate effect on vehicle engines and headlights. The Levin case would become one of Project Blue Book's most famous multiple witness events, and one of its most poorly explained. The first call to Leland police came around 11 p.m. A young man driving on Highway 116 reported his truck had stalled when a bright object landed on the road ahead. He described a glowing egg-shaped mass, approximately 200 feet long, radiating an intense blue-white light. His truck engine and headlights died as the craft approached. Terrified, he sat in silence until the object lifted into the air. When it departed, his engine started normally again. Initially, officers dismissed the call as a prank. UFO sightings were on the rise in 1957, and police were accustomed to teenagers phoning in false alarms. But within minutes, more calls arrived. Around 11:45 p.m., two other motorists reported similar experiences on different roads. Their vehicles had stalled as a luminous object hovered overhead. Both described the craft as oval, glowing brightly, and silent. They too experienced sudden engine failure and headlight blackouts, followed by a return to normal function once the object departed. By midnight, Levelland's police switchboard was overwhelmed. Calls poured in from across the region. Patrol cars were dispatched to investigate. Now, if across different highways, something extraordinary was unfolding on that night. Drivers reported an almost identical experience, a massive glowing object that caused vehicle interference and sudden, inexplicable events. Pedro Salado, a farmhand traveling with his friend Joe Salas, provided one of the most detailed accounts. Around 11:30 p.m., their truck died as a torpedo-shaped craft, approximately 200 feet long with a bluish-white glow, descended nearby. The light was so intense it illuminated the entire road. As the object passed overhead, the truck's engine and lights went dead. Once the object moved on, the truck restarted without issue. Another report came from a Texas Tech student driving home from a football game, who also described his car dying when a glowing oval hovered over the road. Each report added another layer of consistency, another voice describing the same improbable chain of events. By 1 a.m., Levelland police officers themselves became direct witnesses. Patrolman A.J. Fowler received radio confirmation from officers in the field who had seen the object and experienced interference. One deputy described it hovering low above the prairie before darting away at tremendous speed. Another reported flickering headlights as the object passed overhead. What made the Levelland wave so striking was not just the number of witnesses, but the uniformity of their experiences. Independent drivers described the same phenomenon almost identically. Vehicles stalling, glowing oval craft, silent hovering, sudden acceleration. The following day, the Air Force dispatched an investigator from Project Blue Book to Levelland. By then, the craft was gone, leaving only reports behind. Interviews were conducted and affidavits collected. Blue Book's summary listed 10 separate witnesses, though local police claimed to have logged more than twice that number. Faced with such consistency, Blue Book should have treated the case as one of its strongest. Instead, the Air Force concluded that witnesses had likely observed electrical storms and ball lightning. Investigators suggested unusual weather conditions had caused car malfunctions and light flickering, claiming the glowing objects were merely atmosphere discharges. However, there was a problem. The weather that night was clear. No storms were reported in the region. Ball lightning, while a known phenomenon, is rare and unpredictable. Ball lightning does not hover in torpedo-shaped forms hundreds of feet long, nor silently dart across highways. Yet witnesses described something extraordinary that lasted not just seconds, but prolonged minutes. The Air Force explanation seemed implausible, even at the time. Witnesses were angered by the dismissal. Many insisted they had never seen anything like it before, and that their vehicle failures were too perfectly timed to be coincidence. Some, like Sasheo, stuck to their accounts until their deaths. The pattern of engine stalling became especially significant in later UFO research, classified as a close encounter, a case where physical effects on machinery or the environment are documented. Leveland quickly gained notoriety among UFO researchers. Civilian investigators who arrived in town collected more testimonies than Blue Book had recorded, suggesting the Air Force had deliberately minimized the scope of the incident. Independent reports from surrounding towns added weight, with motorists up to 20 miles away describing the same glowing craft. The Leveland landings carried broader implications. In the 1950s, the United States was locked in the Cold War, and concerns about aerial incursions were high. If an unknown object could disable multiple vehicles across a wide area, it suggested a technology that could neutralize machinery at will. For military planners, such a capability raised alarming possibilities. Rather than pursue the matter deeply, the Air Force downplayed it, preferring to label it natural phenomena. Over the years, Leveland has been revisited by researchers, journalists, and skeptics alike. Some attempted to revive the electrical storm theory, pointing to atmospheric anomalies. Others suggested mass hysteria or coordinated pranks. But the sheer number of independent witnesses, their credibility, and the uniform physical effects continue to challenge these explanations. Decades later, the case still stands out in the Blue Book files. It is one of the rare incidents where physical effects on vehicles were consistently reported across multiple independent witnesses in a short span of time. The documentation is clear, the testimony detailed, and the Air Force's dismissal thin. For the people of Leland, that night remains a legend. Older residents still recall how the town buzzed with stories of glowing craft, dead engines, and frightened motorists. For the officers who logged the calls, it was one of the busiest and strangest nights in their experience. Not in the archives of unexplained encounters, the USS Nimitz's incident stands as a pivotal moment in UFO documentation. Off the coast of Southern California in November 2004, a U.S. Navy carrier strike group experienced an event that would challenge conventional understanding of aerial phenomena. The USS Princeton, a guided missile cruiser with advanced SPY-1 radar, had been tracking unusual objects for days. These targets displayed extraordinary capabilities, sudden appearances at high altitudes, hovering and then dropping tens of thousands of feet in seconds, far beyond known aircraft performance. Radar technicians initially suspected equipment malfunction, but repeated calibrations confirmed the returns were genuine. On November 14th, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate were dispatched to investigate a recurring radar contact. Upon arrival, they witnessed a peculiar scene, a disturbance in the ocean surface, and a white, oblong object hovering above. Approximately 40 feet long, smooth and wingless, the craft's shape resembled a tic-tac mint, earning its now famous nickname. As Fravor attempted to approach, the object demonstrated extraordinary responsiveness. It instantly mirrored his movements and could dart away at incredible speeds when he tried to close the distance. This encounter represents one of the clearest and most credible UFO incidents in military history. The documentation reveals both the strengths and limitations of official investigations like Project Blue Book. Ultimately, like many extraordinary events, this incident left behind more questions than answers. Testimonies remain preserved in official files and in the memories of those who experienced this remarkable night, a glowing craft that haunted the highways of West Texas, vanishing as suddenly as it appeared, leaving only stalled engines and shaken witnesses in its wake. Not Navy pilots tracked an object that defied all known technological capabilities during a routine mission in 2004. When first spotted, the craft moved at incredible speeds, seemingly vanishing and reappearing across vast distances instantaneously. Chad Underwood and another flight of FA-18s were dispatched with advanced targeting equipment after initial radar detection. Using the LI camera system, Underwood successfully captured footage that would later become famous. The black and white video revealed a featureless object rotating and accelerating out of frame with no visible wings or exhaust. Pilots and radar operators aboard the carriers were stunned by what they had witnessed. David Fravor, one of the key witnesses, described the craft's movements as completely beyond human understanding. It could hover motionless and then suddenly accelerate to hypersonic speeds without any apparent propulsion system. While the incident was officially reported and investigated, no conventional explanation emerged. Some speculated about secret advanced technology or experimental drones, but no known program could match the object's performance. The combination of visual sightings, multiple radar systems, and infrared video made alternative explanations seem implausible. For years, the encounter remained obscure, known only within military and UFO research circles. Everything changed in 2017 when the New York Times published an article about the Pentagon's secret aerospace threat identification program. The Navy officially released the Lear video, bringing the 2004 incident into global awareness. Since then, the involved pilots have spoken publicly, with Fravor being particularly consistent in his accounts. His reputation as a disciplined and respected officer has lent significant credibility to the story. The Tic Tac encounter continues to challenge our understanding of technological capabilities and potential extraterrestrial encounters. This is no ordinary UFO account. The story comes from military professionals with solid evidence, not anonymous sources. The Ice Tac case has become pivotal in understanding unidentified aerial phenomena. Defense experts debate it, and official reports now reference this extraordinary encounter. Radar data, visual confirmation, and video footage make this incident impossible to brush aside. What Fravor and his fellow pilots witnessed over the Pacific Ocean defies conventional explanation. It wasn't a bird, balloon, or misidentified aircraft. This was something structured, capable of performance far beyond current human technological limits. The USS Nimitz encounter represents a watershed moment in 21st century UFO research. For the pilots who watched this object move effortlessly across their radar screens, it was a stark reminder of how little we truly understand about what occupies our skies. Nearly 2 decades later, the mystery remains unresolved. On April 6, 1966, something extraordinary happened at Westall High School in Melbourne, Australia. The morning began ordinarily enough, students moving toward classrooms after the bell. Then everything changed. A girl's scream broke the routine. She pointed skyward, where a silver disc hovered silently above the trees. Dozens of students froze, their attention locked on this strange object. Some gasped, others laughed nervously. The disc was metallic, slightly domed and glowing faintly, wobbling like a spinning plate as it moved through the clear autumn sky. One student later described watching the object glide westward, descending over the tree line before vanishing behind pine trees bordering a nearby field. Curiosity overwhelmed caution. Roughly 200 students from Westall High and Westall Primary vaulted the fence, racing toward where the disc had reportedly touched down. Teachers shouted warnings, but no one was listening. The object disappeared within minutes. Yet its impression, both physical and psychological, would endure far longer than its brief appearance. 1966, an extraordinary event unfolded that would become one of Australia's most significant mass UFO sightings. The morning started like any other at the local school, but something unusual was about to change everything. Students buzzed with excitement and confusion, while teachers in the staff lounge huddled together, their reactions ranging from shaken to deeply skeptical. Suddenly, men in dark suits arrived, presenting themselves as government officials. They asked quiet but persistent questions, insisting to staff that nothing out of the ordinary had occurred and that students were mistaken about seeing a weather balloon. At the site in the paddock where students claimed the disc had landed, a large circular patch of flattened grass appeared. Several boys reported approaching the location before the object lifted off with incredible speed. Joy Clark, a student at the time, recalled, "I saw it go straight up. No, at an angle. Straight up, and it was gone in seconds." Terry Peake told investigators she saw 5 planes chasing the object just before it disappeared. Other students described hearing a humming or worrying sound just before it ascended. Notably, the pilots were never identified and no military activity officially acknowledged. In the days following the incident, an official explanation of a weather balloon was hastily delivered, but students knew better. Years later, one student reflected, "They told us it was just a balloon, but we saw it with our own eyes. It was not a balloon. It moved like nothing we've ever seen." The aftermath was swift and suppressive. Teachers were warned not to talk to the media. Students were instructed to forget what they had witnessed. At least one staff member who spoke publicly was dismissed. Some students reported being pulled aside by men claiming to be from the government and firmly told to stop talking. Decades later, Andrew Greenwood, a science teacher at Westall, finally broke his silence. He described the object as a dull, grey, almost metallic entity that hovered, moved at incredible speed, and made no noise. The incident at Westall remains unexplained, a mysterious event that continues to intrigue and perplex those who were present that extraordinary morning. The Westall UFO encounter became a story that lived on, passed from student to student across decades. Despite initial threats to silence witnesses, the account gradually emerged as UFO stigma began to wane in the early 2000s. By 2006, on the 40th anniversary of the event, a public gathering near the school brought many original witnesses together. Their stories remained unchanged, highlighting the remarkable consistency of their accounts. What makes this incident so compelling is the sheer number of independent eyewitness reports. Teachers, students, and local residents all described the same craft movements and subsequent cover-up. These weren't attention seekers. In many cases, they had stayed silent for decades, fearing ridicule. Physical evidence remained frustratingly scarce. The crop circle was never formally analyzed. The paddock was quickly bulldozed and developed, and Channel 9 footage remains missing. No official report has ever been made public. Even skeptics struggled to dismiss the case. Weather balloons don't land vertically, hover, move laterally, or outrun planes. Today, the Westall incident stands as one of the most enduring unsolved mass sightings in UFO history, a broad daylight event witnessed by hundreds. This wasn't a single witness account easily dismissed. It was a shared experience, a communal truth, a moment when the sky briefly opened to reveal something completely foreign before closing again. Now, in their 60s and 70s, many witnesses still carry vivid memories. Some continue dreaming about that day, spending years trying to understand what they saw. Joy Clark captured the sentiment perfectly in a 2010 interview. "We were kids, but we weren't stupid. We saw something that didn't belong to this earth." This was more than just a story. It was a collective moment of inexplicable wonder that has continued to intrigue and challenge our understanding of the unknown. Lake Baikal, the world's largest freshwater lake by volume and deeper than the Grand Canyon in some places, sits nestled within the harsh Siberian wilderness. For years, locals whispered about strange phenomena, mysterious lights emerging from its depths, entire fishing vessels vanishing, and shadowy figures skimming the water's surface on moonless nights. During the Cold War's height, these stories caught the Soviet military's attention. A special unit was tasked with investigating what some called swimmer encounters. Major General Vasily Adamno, responsible for overseeing anomalous phenomena for the KGB and Soviet Air Force, later confirmed multiple naval operations had experienced unexplainable underwater activities. In 1982, a routine training mission near the lake's western shore would become a chilling testament to these rumors. 7 Soviet Navy divers descended in formation, encountering something extraordinary. Approximately 3 meters tall humanoid beings moved through the water wearing smooth, silvery bodysuits that shimmered faintly in the sunlight filtering from above. These beings weren't swimming traditionally, but drifting controlled, deliberate, silent, watching. The lead diver blinked and checked his mask, realizing he and his team weren't alone. Following standard protocol, the divers attempted to approach and capture these unknown entities. Suddenly, an invisible force erupted through the water. Some described it as a shock wave, others as a sudden compression that violently slammed their bodies backward. The confrontation ended catastrophically. 3 divers never surfaced, dying under mysterious circumstances. The remaining 4 suffered serious injuries, including decompression sickness, despite not exceeding their dive limits. The incident was immediately classified. Military records listed an official cause of death, but the truth remained buried in secrecy for decades, a stark reminder of the inexplicable encounters lurking beneath Lake Baikal's surface. Now, Lake Baikal has long been a hotspot for mysterious underwater phenomena. Locals and military personnel alike have reported strange occurrences that defied conventional explanations. In 1987, fisherman Alexei Timoshenko described a remarkable incident: a glowing orb rising silently from the lake's surface, reflecting a bluish light before shooting straight into the sky without any visible propulsion. Scientific instruments corroborated these unusual events. A research vessel detected an energy anomaly precisely during Timoshenko's sighting, though their official logs remained conspicuously silent. The following year, Listviano residents witnessed something equally extraordinary. Red-orange lights hovering above and moving beneath the lake surface, even penetrating thick ice. Photographic evidence briefly emerged, but plainclothed men quickly confiscated the film reels. Naval personnel later provided unofficial confirmation of even more startling discoveries. Sonar had detected objects moving at impossible speeds over 250 kilometers per hour, performing vertical and horizontal maneuvers beyond any known technological capabilities. These unidentified submerged objects, UFOs, appeared and disappeared without traceable origins. No underwater bases or geological formations could explain their sudden movements. Soviet scientists began collecting environmental data, noting periodic radiation bursts in specific lake zones that would rapidly return to normal levels. During this period, official sources remained tight-lipped. Local media avoided the topic entirely. Only after the Soviet Union's collapse did more information gradually surface. Western researchers and independent Russian UFO groups started interviewing retired military personnel who had served at Lake Baikal, slowly piecing together the extraordinary puzzle of these underwater anomalies. For decades, strange occurrences have haunted the depths of certain bodies of water, with numerous witnesses reporting unexplained phenomena. Reports consistently described impossible movements, lights, and craft behaving in ways no known technology could explain. Captain Mikhail, a retired Soviet naval officer, was among those who witnessed these bizarre events. During submarine drills, he observed green lights moving beneath the surface with an unnatural speed and precision that defied conventional understanding. His account was far from unique. Over nearly 2 decades, a diverse range of observers, from local fishermen to trained military personnel and scientists, corroborated similar experiences. They spoke of fast-moving lights, humanoid swimmers, and silent craft rising from water without any apparent propulsion mechanism. Multiple theories emerged to explain these extraordinary sightings. Some researchers suggested an ancient aquatic species adapted to extreme underwater environments. Others proposed extraterrestrial visitors using lakes and oceans as hidden bases. A few scientists speculated about advanced military technology, though no known system could match the reported maneuverability and silence. Skeptics offered alternative explanations: sonar malfunctions, underwater gas emissions, mass hallucinations, or even bioluminescent marine life. However, none of these theories adequately explain the complex evidence. Consistent visual observations, sonar data, high radiation readings, and unexplained diver fatalities. The most recent public report came in 2009, when amateur divers claimed a glowing disc silently passed beneath them. One diver experienced temporary paralysis, and the incident was never officially investigated. The Russian government has remained conspicuously silent about these phenomena. No official agency has documented or addressed the widespread reports. Locals continue sharing stories in hushed tones, and divers still navigate lake depths with heightened caution. Lake Baikal remains an enigma, not just because of its ancient geological features or unique ecosystem, but because of the persistent mystery lurking in its waters. In an era of omnipresent cameras and instant information, some places retain their secrets, and some mysteries, especially those hidden in ancient icy silence, resist complete understanding. 1960s, Lake Victoria's vast, dark waters were typically quiet, marked only by the rhythmic splash of oars and the soft glow of fishing lanterns. Everything changed one extraordinary night when a brilliant light, suddenly burning, appeared just above the horizon. What started as what fishermen initially thought was a distant vessel's flare quickly transformed into something far more extraordinary. The glow expanded, detaching from the horizon and rising silently, casting such an intense reflection that Africa's largest lake seemed to shimmer like midday. Fishermen dropped their nets in shock, stunned by the spectacle above them. Some later described the light as seeming alive, pulsing and rippling as it hovered. Boats scattered across the Ugandan side of the lake, with crews shouting warnings to each other. Some paddled frantically toward shore, believing a foreign aircraft was about to crash, while others remained paralyzed with fear. One fisherman would later tell a journalist The fish beneath us scattered. It was as though the water itself wanted to escape. Reports soon emerged from the Tanzanian coast confirming this was not an isolated incident. Villagers in shoreline settlements awoke to their huts flooded with an extraordinary glow. Families rushed outside to witness a radiant sphere hovering low over the water. Narrow white-blue light beams descended from the object, sweeping methodically across the lake as if searching for something beneath the surface. These beams moved with an apparent deliberateness, retracting and shifting in ways that suggested intelligent control. After several minutes of steady hovering, the object began gliding across the water's surface, with witnesses comparing its movement to a flameless lantern skimming the waves. Birds roosting along the reeds erupted into the night sky in sudden flight. When the object finally rose higher, it did so with startling speed. Some witnesses claimed it shot vertically into the sky, becoming a tiny pinpoint before vanishing. Others insisted the light split into smaller orbs that darted in different directions before reuniting. By dawn, word of the event had spread widely. In Ugandan markets, fishermen spoke of a sun that came at night, forever changing their understanding of what could inhabit their familiar waters. Note along the Tanzanian coast, elders recalled children crying as beams swept across a village. A silent, luminous object hovered low over the lake, moving with purpose, and vanished as suddenly as I appeared. Stars danced on the water and nigh. Police reports in Uganda and Tanzania had quietly logged even. Colonial officials, working in a Regent Sil Ransitioning Award independence, made no explanations. No radar facilities were available. The Hileke, he signed leave no recognize analyze. By the mid-1960s, both carriers had become independent, and the case remained part of local memory. For UFO researchers, his Lake Victoria incident became one of the most significant multi-witness cases on the African continent. It was remarkable for several reasons. The geographic scale spanned an international boundary, and witnesses from different backgrounds provided concise accounts. Fishermen, villagers, and travelers along shoreline roads all described the same phenomenon. Skeptics have offered several explanations: meteors, ball lightning, and even smugglers' flares. Few his theories fall short. Meteors do no hover, ball lightning rarely lasts more than seconds, and smugglers' flares cannot explain he craft's silence and deliberate movements. He geopolitical connects mares deeply. In the 1960s, East Africa was experiencing profound change. Independence movements were reshaping Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. Foreign military presence was limited, and advanced aircraft were rare. A glowing, structured craft here behaved beyond technology suggested something extraordinary. Local communities quickly absorbed the experience. Ugandan fishing villagers remembered I as the nighty sky ouched water. Tanzanian elders interpreted I as an omen. A vision from something beyond earth. In air readings, he fear and awe remained vivid and genuine. The night the lights appeared over Lake Victoria transformed entire communities. For the people along its shores in Uganda and Tanzania, this wasn't just another story. It was a moment when something truly inexplicable occurred. The region's unique geological characteristics might offer some context. Lake Victoria sits along the East African Rift, an area known for electromagnetic and geological anomalies. Researchers suggest these conditions could have influenced the phenomenon, with some speculating that the lake's vast isolation provided a perfect stage for unexplained aerial events. Decades later, the story remains vivid. Older fishermen still tell younger generations to respect the lake, not just for its storms, but for the unexplained things that appear above its waters. Families in shoreline villages recall how that night turned everything upside down. Beams of light swept across huts, and silence carried more dread than any sound. What makes this encounter so compelling is its credibility. Multiple independent witnesses reported the same thing. No satellites, rockets, or known aircraft matched the described behavior. To those who saw it, this wasn't an illusion or a mistake. It was real, structured, and undeniably foreign. The Lake Victoria lights have become one of Africa's greatest UFO mysteries, an event where entire communities looked up and witnessed something seemingly impossible. For those involved, the memory remains unchanged. It was not from here. These encounters echo similar incidents elsewhere, like the Mount Vernon lights in Indiana during October 1966. That night, a series of reports began with a motorist pulling over on a rural road shaken by glowing lights hovering above his car. Pulsating with a strange rhythm, they suddenly shot upward and vanished into the night sky. Within an hour, multiple accounts flooded the police switchboard. What distinguished these reports was their striking consistency. Witnesses described bright spherical lights, often in pairs or trios, moving with an uncanny precision that defied conventional explanation. Eerie lights drifted low across the countryside that year, catching the attention of local residents. Descriptions varied. Some saw white orbs, others orange or bluish lights. But everyone agreed on their strange behavior. These objects moved in ways no known aircraft could, making sudden stops and impossible turns, covering miles of sky in mere seconds. Sheriff's deputies began investigating the unusual phenomenon. Deputy Harold Schultz reported a glowing object hovering silently over the Wabash River bottoms. When he tried to approach, the object darted away at incredible speed, leaving him staring into the darkness. Another deputy encountered similar lights near farmland, noting his radio briefly crackled with static as the object passed overhead. The year was 1966, the same time as the famous Michigan swamp gas sightings that had embarrassed the Air Force. In Mount Vernon, families gathered in their yards, watching glowing orbs drift silently above. A local teenager later described the lights as inexplicable. Not planes, not meteors, just hanging there as if someone was watching. These sightings persisted for several nights, always appearing after dusk. Farmers noticed their livestock becoming unusually restless, with dogs barking at seemingly empty skies moments before the lights emerged. At least 2 motorists claimed their cars temporarily faltered when the lights hovered nearby, though the engines restarted without permanent damage. Local speculation ran wild. Was it Soviet aircraft, experimental U.S. jets, or something from beyond? The Mount Vernon Democrat ran cautious headlines quoting both frightened residents and skeptical officials. The sheriff's office logged multiple calls but offered no official explanation. The Air Force sent investigators as part of Project Blue Book. For a small town of fewer than 10,000 people, these mysterious lights became the primary topic of conversation in diners, barbershops, and church gatherings. The phenomenon mirrored similar interference cases reported in other states, adding weight to the mounting intrigue surrounding these unexplained aerial visitors. Nor, during the 1966 Midwest UFO wave, Mount Vernon became a focal point for unexplained aerial phenomena that challenged the ordinary rhythms of small-town life. Law enforcement officers, farmers, teenagers, and families all shared an extraordinary experience under the night sky. The lights defied conventional explanation. While some dismissed the sightings, many local witnesses stood firm. Deputies who filed official statements insisted the objects were real, structured, and responsive. Stars and aircraft navigation beacons could not account for the movements they observed. Hundreds of similar reports emerged across Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana that year. The Mount Vernon incidents fit a broader pattern, distinguished by credible law enforcement documentation. These were more than mere curiosities. They represented a moment when something truly unexplained disrupted the quiet community. Though official records classified the events as identified phenomena, those who witnessed the lights knew differently. They remembered the precise movements, the unnatural silence, and the sudden acceleration that seemed to defy known physics. The lights pulsed in ways that could not be easily dismissed. For some residents, the sightings became part of local folklore, stories shared at family gatherings. Others were left with a lingering unease, a sense that something unknown had briefly visited their skies. The orbs never returned with the same intensity as that October night. Mount Vernon returned to its peaceful existence along the Ohio River, but the memory remained vivid. Today, these lights are a footnote in national UFO history yet. For those who were present, they represent something more. They are a reminder that extraordinary events can unfold in the most unexpected places, where wide skies and long nights create perfect conditions for mystery. On a metallic object hung mysteriously in the sky above a farm in rural Oregon. The photos were far from blurry. Instead, the craft appeared solid, structured, and undeniably strange. By June, newspapers across the country had reprinted these remarkable images, transforming the quiet farm town of McMinnville into the epicenter of one of the 20th century's most enduring UFO mysteries. The photographs dated back to an evening in May 1950 when Paul and Evelyn Trent, local farmers, captured something extraordinary. Evelyn first spotted the unusual craft while feeding chickens. She quickly called Paul, who grabbed his camera and managed to snap 2 photographs as the object moved eastward and vanished. The images were compelling. A classic saucer shape with a curved underside and distinct dome lacking any visible wings, tail, or propulsion system, at a time when flying saucer was still a relatively new term. These pictures seemed to perfectly embody the concept. Interestingly, the Trents were in no rush to share their discovery. The film sat undeveloped for weeks, and when finally printed, they showed the photos only to friends. A local reporter eventually brought them to wider attention. This reluctance actually bolstered the photograph's credibility. Researchers later noted the couple sought neither fame nor financial gain. They simply documented what they'd witnessed. When the images were published, they immediately attracted the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book investigators. Analysts found no signs of trickery. The shadows aligned with the time of day, the object's size and distance suggested an aerial phenomenon, and the Trent's account remained consistent under questioning. Skeptics proposed alternative explanations, a model perhaps, or a hubcap suspended by a string, but no conclusive evidence of a hoax was ever proven. The timing of these photographs was crucial. In the early 1950s, Americans were still grappling with the emerging concept of extraterrestrial visitors. The McMinnville images captured a moment of collective fascination and uncertainty, preserving a pivotal moment in UFO history. The McMinnville UFO photographs have become a pivotal moment in the history of unidentified flying object documentation. Taken in 1950 by the Trent family on their Oregon farm, these images emerged during an era when UFO sightings were generating intense public curiosity. The 1947 Washington sighting and Roswell incident had already primed the public's imagination, but clear photographic evidence was scarce. Unlike many UFO claims, the Trents never sought fame or financial gain from their experience. They consistently recounted the same story over decades, living modestly and maintaining the integrity of their account. Scientific scrutiny has been a constant companion to these photographs, with the Condon Committee in the 1960s concluding the images were consistent with a genuine distant object. Subsequent studies have reinforced the initial assessment, though skeptics argue that a sophisticated hoax cannot be completely ruled out. The photographs have transcended their original context, becoming iconic representations of UFO encounters. They are frequently reproduced in serious UFO literature and are considered some of the most compelling photographic evidence ever captured. The legacy of the McMinnville photographs extends far beyond the original sighting. The town now hosts an annual UFO festival, drawing visitors from around the world. The Trents are remembered not as attention seekers, but as ordinary people who happened to document an extraordinary moment. More than 7 decades later, these images remain a fascinating enigma. They occupy a unique space between definitive proof and enduring mystery. Whether the object was an extraterrestrial craft or something more mundane, the photographs have profoundly influenced how generations imagine and conceptualize flying saucers. Their power lies in their persistent ability to provoke discussion and wonder. As long as these images continue to be studied and debated, they serve as a reminder that extraordinary moments can emerge in the most unexpected places, leaving an indelible mark on our collective imagination. In the realm of unexpected revelations, some stories defy conventional understanding. Many people have long wondered about hidden truths lurking beneath the surface of official narratives. These mysteries often involve complex connections between governments, advanced technologies, and encounters that challenge our fundamental perceptions of reality. Some researchers have dedicated entire careers to investigating phenomena that mainstream science struggles to explain. They collect evidence, interview witnesses, and meticulously document accounts that suggest something profound exists beyond our current comprehension. Unexplained aerial sightings, encounters with unidentified objects, and testimonies from credible sources continue to fuel ongoing discussions about what might actually be happening in the shadows of human knowledge. Government documents, occasionally released through Freedom of Information requests, sometimes hint at extraordinary events that don't fit neatly into standard explanatory frameworks. These fragments of information suggest intricate networks of communication and understanding that extend far beyond typical public awareness. Military personnel, scientists, and high-ranking officials have periodically shared experiences that challenge conventional wisdom about our place in the universe. The quest for understanding remains ongoing. Each new piece of evidence, each unexpected testimony, contributes to a growing body of research that seeks to illuminate the unknown. While definitive answers remain elusive, the commitment to investigation continues, driven by human curiosity and the persistent belief that there are more questions than current answers can resolve. Without the complete context, I cannot accurately restructure the paragraph while maintaining its original meaning.